So I understand I'll be chairing this evening's meeting. Judith will be, I guess, viewing or trying to view as a participant. And I just received a message from Stephen Welch. He will not be attending this evening's meeting, a last minute family issue. So just wanted to let you know about those two. Well, let's see. Do we have a quorum? I think Fritz, Nat, myself.
Yep. Dave should be on.
Yeah, I'll give it a few for Dave. I see Dave.
Yeah, he should be on.
Pam. Does Andrew, is Leslie going to be coming in? Do you know? Yes, okay. Give it a couple more minutes.
Megan? Fritz.
Hey, Fritz.
Hi. You know, I think I found the problem. They must be the NCTV must be sending the link to my old email address because I don't get it under this one.
Okay, hold on. Let me see where I had them send it.
I-
So I make sure that does not happen next time.
Yeah.
Welcome, Dave Iverson.
We can check on that later. It's just,
Meg, are you all set? I know we're just looking for Leslie to come in. It's about 3 after, so I think we could start the meeting. First, welcome everyone, and I'll just read out the governor's orders. We are conducting this meeting via Zoom webinar and remote participation pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order regarding open meeting law. And before we get started, I just want to make a quick announcement. Just note that the purpose of this meeting is for the board and the staff to have preliminary review and discussion of the citizen articles and the planning board sponsored articles. Public hearings will occur in January to discuss each article in detail with the public. Board members should also use this time to let staff know if further research on any of these articles is needed so that it may be prepared and presented in advance of the public hearings. So if anybody's coming in from the audience, we're really not opening this up for any kind of discussion. It's really to discuss amongst the board. And they'll have plenty of time in future meetings, especially in the January meetings, that we'll be discussing in detail and open to the general public. So with that, I'd like to call the meeting to order, and I'd like to get an approval of the agenda. Is there any
So
motion?
moved.
Second.
So moved.
Nat made the motion, and I believe Fritz second. All those in favor by roll call, Nat,
Aye.
Fritz,
Aye.
Dave Iverson,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Discussion of the affordable housing article, planning board sponsored. The Affordable Housing Trust and Municipal Housing Director has presented the following concepts to the Director of Planning and Planning Board sponsored articles. The expansion of the workforce housing to R10 to R20. Meg, do we want to have any comment? Or should I just read those three and then ask the board if they have any comments?
I know Andrew had met with, Andrew, was it Tucker and Rima or Dave Iverson?
Dave Iverson.
Dave Iverson and Rima. So I think maybe, if they wanted to contribute what they spoke about in those conversations and kind of what their thoughts are on these concepts for the board to weigh in on whether they want to pursue presenting them at town meeting.
Okay, I think.
Yeah, John, do you want to take these one by one, or do you want to just?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Why don't we do it one by one so there's no questions. At the first one, the expansion of the workforce housing to R10 and R20.
Okay, so the concept here is to extend the workforce ownership housing to R10 and R20. The two districts right now, workforce ownership housing is allowed in the R5 district only.
Yeah.
R10, as you know, contains a lot of and location-wise contains a lot of our year-round affordable housing in R20 as well. Again, this is not extending the workforce rental provision here. This is just for, again, the purpose here is to extend ownership possibilities. So these would be two separate articles for both to consider for R10 and R20. We have not developed what the actual standard would be right now in R5. The minimum lot size to consider workforce ownership is a 60,000 square foot parcel. And there's not a lot of those, as you can imagine. And we wanted to start with that, with a limited amount of them in the beginning. And where we have approved those are basically in the Richmond area. So the Richmond is one in phase 2. Those have been implemented. So there would still be some work to identify what that minimum development parcel would be. In R10, we have seen, some developments in the neighborhood of 7 or 8 lots, same with R20. So the idea would be that, that would be the general type of development where there would be a certain bonus provided, in a place that was going to be subdivided to do basically the housing units that are 80, available to 80% households or less. So the trust, I think in their meeting, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but seems to me the trust supported that idea and wanted the planning board to be co-sponsors with them in advancing that article.
Correct. Well, I think there was some confusion about sponsorship just by the planning board. So I don't know, but yes, I mean, I think these three articles, less the two, less the last one, just because I think that I know that Nat's been working on that, and I think he said that maybe Leslie's been looking at it too. So we weren't real clear about the two covenants on a lot, but these two articles, the first two, are definitely ones that we would like to push forward if possible.
So, Andrew, in discussing the first one here from R10 to R20, we're still waiting for a minimal size lot. So right now, presently 60,000, or is there is there a wish list? Like obviously the R5 is 5,000 square feet. And if we're getting duplexes in R10s, really, you're looking at two dwellings for a 5,000 square foot lot anyway. But are we looking at, something in even less than that?
Well, John, I think what we would look at is, the minimum lot, this is going to require a lot of work, and we haven't really got into that yet until we knew that there has to be some general policy level support for us to start doing the amount of work that we're going to need to do here. So I don't know if there's a lot of 60,000 square foot lots. It's something that we would, put together and get an actual, bylaw in front of you before the time that the warrant will be adopted on January 26th. So if this is something you would support, we have to do the research about, what kind of lots are remaining in R10, what kind of lots are remaining in R20. And what kind of bonuses would make sense to do in each of those districts. So the threshold is quite high right now in R5. There's, there were, I think, about 10 possible sites, as I remember. And you could possibly create more by changing land to R5. But the one that we've seen where we've actually have experience with at least this ownership bylaw is the Richmond property right now.
Anyone else on the board have any comments?
Andrew,
On one,
Andrew, okay.
one clarification too on the warrant is, at this point, the select board has to include any of the articles that we send to them in the warrant. So they do have the final decision. They have essentially veto power over any article that's created now, just so we're all clear.
John,
Yes, Fritz.
on the second one, are we, Pat, is it appropriate to bring up the second one? Are we talking about all three?
Well, Andrew, I think we were trying to take the first one at
Okay.
a time, but if they're
Okay. No, that's fine.
commingling within each other, then we can open up the discussion to all three. I see that Cam's hand is waved, so I'll let her comment in case she has something to say on the first one. Cam?
Well, hi, thank you so much. I think I really just have a question. Like, would it be possible to potentially follow this idea into the R10 and see how that develops, and then at another time look at the R20? Would that at all be helpful in terms of workload, and also just in terms of getting a feel for what this actually means in reality, like properties on the ground? What would that look like? Just wondering if a thought or a possibility.
Kevin, do you want me to answer?
Andrew, yes, please, if you have a response to that, sure.
Yeah, I do. Again, these are big decisions. The R10 is a, fairly compact area. R20 is much bigger. So it depends, there are 11 citizen articles that have been submitted that, you all will be required to have hearings on and come up with a recommendation. We are going to pare down our list that we've discussed with you. I think, in the past, when there's too many zoning articles, it's a lot to do at one meeting. So again, you need to think about, I guess, what you're definitely going to have before you the issues that are coming forward, and maybe we focus on one versus the other. But I do think it's important to have them in separate articles because, again, they're separate individual areas.
Thank you. Cam?
Oh, I was just going to follow up on what Andrew was saying. I mean, I'm all for going for the R20 to see how that works if there's more of those, but it seems pretty complex to put something together for both categories. And so I was just trying to, figure out if following one category, if following the R20 would allow for greater distribution of workforce housing throughout the island, which I think is a goal, then that would be fine too. Anyway, that's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew, just one last question about this. Obviously, you mentioned Richmond Group, and is there any kind of sense to try and get support for this by being more focused on a particular area like the Richmond Group instead of opening it up to zoning areas on the entire island? That might cause some questions and I guess opposition at town meeting. Should we more or less focus on a certain area to try and get it passed? Or is it something that if all the work's going in, you really want to kind of get everything out on the table?
Well, John, I think it's a good question. I'm glad that Campbell raised it because there is certainly diversity in the R20 district. There's area of R20 that are in a sewer district, areas that are not.
Yeah.
So it's a good point that, we have R20, in far reaches of the island where, R10 is sort of compact and might be at least, a good area to start and see if there's some general support for, expansion of that concept. Because what it does do is it does allow for a bonus. So increasing density where basically workforce housing is included in, a proposal. So, an example would be the, they chose the open space development at the property on Fairgrounds. That was an R10 zoning district. And there's not, it worked out great because an affordable housing entity has bought it and is going to develop it. But, say that hadn't been present, bylaw like this would give an option for development of affordability, in a proposal like that.
And I think, obviously, anything that we want to sponsor as a board and support, we're looking to get it passed. So when you mention that R10 and it's condensed in an area like Fairgrounds, the first thing that comes to mind is the fear that we're going to get pushback because a lot of that concentration is located in the same areas where we have Tacoma Green and we just had Fairgrounds, and then we have Surfside. And then by focusing on that one particular area, in that sense, it may be better to open it up to the other zoning areas, because then it's not just concentrating on that area where we're going to get a lot of pushback because they're saying, where else can there be an R10? So that's why I'd like to talk about this and discuss it, because I think when we hash this out like that, the way it's presented, it might be advantageous to open it up to the other areas of the island and the R20.
John, can I just
Yeah,
ask
please.
Andrew? I want to just ask Andrew a question that's sort of fresh. Andrew, that development that we just approved in R20 on the left side of Rugged Road, what's that, number 8, whatever it is, that is a perfect example of how this bylaw would have been able to offer a choice. Now it's going to be what it can be now. You know what I mean? Like that was a big chunk of land sort of just sitting there in sewer district that just, you know, this would have been a perfect opportunity. I think one of the things that I just wanted to bring up real quick, Andrew, is it's CN as well, right? This is in, it's not just R5, it's CN, correct?
EN is the rental, the workforce rental.
So that's, but it ends up looking the same. They can build the same way, like the thing across from the school, right? The four
Yes,
buildings.
you can do individual. Yeah, you can do individual.
Yeah. So my point is, there isn't much land left in the areas that we would want this to go. So when you say a minimum lot of, what did you say, 60,000? That's, you know, for all intents and purposes, an acre and a half theoretically. I mean, how much land is left in R10 like that's that big? Probably not a lot. In the R20, and that the catch with the R20 in that same area on Rugged Road area that we've already had a go around with that neighborhood trying to change the zoning to R40. It's sort of, I look at that land now as the same as Fairgrounds because the zoning got left in R20. It used to be less. And it sort of, there's still some pretty good sized pieces of land in there that could end up, you know, taking advantage of this bylaw. But explaining this at town meeting is complicated. This hasn't been brought up since November 9th, 2015. When it was in, and no one even knows what it is. This is the way to do, you know, theoretically a local version of what a 40B would be through the planning board without any state, you know, say. So, you know, we have to kind of start over. And I do think that R10 is more important than R20. I do agree with that. Because the sewer is going to take care of the problem, John, that you brought up. There's nobody's going to be building workforce housing in Quidnet in R20, I can tell you that. So, you know what I mean? There's a lot of R20 Hummock Pond Road area. There's some places that have it, but Cato, up that way off Vesper, has a lot of R20 as well, but that's in the sewer district. So there's some good with that. It's, Andrew, we can't craft this article to only be for certain areas, can we? Is that illegal? I would assume it probably is. We've had this discussion before about other things.
We could do an overlay, and you know that I don't like to continue to add overlays. They're confusing and
Yeah. Well, then you have the other issue with the covenant article that could help kind of make this, I don't want to say mute, but it might help make this less of an issue. It's a tough one. I like the R10 idea for sure because of where the land is, because it's in the right place. And there's not a lot of R10 beyond that.
So Andrew, I think with this, maybe it would be helpful to show how many lots are actually going to be available or affected if we do any kind of change, so we can get a sense of where they are located throughout the island and the concentration of them, because it's not so much the sewer, that's obviously a bonus. It's really going to be the pushback with traffic all being consolidated in one area. And that's the only thing I worry about. We've already kind of built up Fairgrounds with the few projects that we have there, especially with Richmond Old South Road filtering past and on that.
just in terms of, so you understand the current bonus. So the 60,000 is based on basically 12 5,000 square foot lots. So in that same area, you get a bonus of 4 additional lots. So in that 60,000, if you use the workforce housing bylaw, you would get 16. Again, it doesn't have to be the same, but again, that's the existing bylaw bonus as it applies to R5.
I guess I think it would be important to figure, as you said, how many lots do we see taking advantage of this? I mean, if there's 3 lots that could take advantage of it in R10, is it really worth the effort? Right? I mean, if we have more opportunity in R20, even though it's more painful, that could be the way to go. I mean, I think it would definitely take out a lot of those pieces along Fairgrounds, because there's not a lot of R20 around there. So I guess, I mean, the question is to see what the community can stomach, I guess, really is what it comes down to, maybe. I'm not sure.
Can I ask a question? I mean, do you think if we were to look at R20, would we want to factor in, existing sewer district or, things like that
Yes.
as being important for that?
Nat says yes.
Yeah, I say, yeah.
All the other members.
For you, John,
Sure.
would there, I mean, it's going to look different whether it's in a sewered or non-sewered, correct? Right? I mean, you're not going to be able to have the same amount of dwellings.
Mhm.
Right? So that could be, I mean, that's definitely going to formulate what they can have and they can't in an R20 lot.
Yep.
Cam, your hand's raised.
Yeah, so excuse me, so as everyone's speaking, the one thing that is sort of coming to me in terms of the ability to pass this, I think and this is just my, like I said, as you are all discussing it, what comes to me is that there may be a lot of pushback in areas that have had a lot of overdevelopment already. And if the R10s are really in areas people have been experiencing what they perceive to be overdevelopment or increased traffic, etc., they may be less likely to be supportive of the idea. I know with the apartments at Tacoma Green, there was a thought when it passed up in the controversy that people had thought they were going to get a group of cottages, and instead they've got the first of what will obviously be many apartment buildings. And I'm not sure that that was received very well. So that's, like I said, that was just what was coming to me as you guys were talking. Thanks.
Andrew, with the R20, and I know we've made mention of R10 and R10L in the past, is putting a designation like an R20L with restrictions on it, similar to something that you don't want to do with the overlay? Or is there some way that we can actually kind of cater it to certain areas of R20?
Yeah, that would be a map change, and that's something that possibly could be considered. It's preference or it's a preference than doing an overlay, because again, the overlays can be very, it's your basic zoning district with, that the building inspector and others then have to run through a bunch of, overlay type, does this apply? Does that apply? Whereas actual zoning map change is there, and the standards are sort of all articulated. So anyway, well, I guess I'm hearing the board wants to still take a look at this. So we will look at what the larger parcels are in both districts for now. We can have a further discussion.
Yeah, and I think that, it just popped into my head, the Appleton area is all R20 down in there. Like, what's that, Helen's Drive, those type of areas. But they're already developed. And you have to think about, I hate to say it, but redeveloping land that's already built is going to continue regardless of whether we have this bylaw or not. So what would your minimum lot size be in the R20? What was your thought process? Same thing, 60?
Well, I think it would have to be higher. I think it would be.
Okay, I was going to say, I was going to suggest that that's what you were thinking already, so.
think it would
Okay.
be 80,000, you know, be 80,000 or something higher.
Yeah.
Megan, I don't know. Megan, are you able to put the zoning map up at all, or? So I'm talking about the overall, Megan, not the.
My computer is being really slow. Sorry.
Oh.
That's it.
So that, I guess, Megan, can you point out that like the kind of clay colored reddish color there is the R20? So you see that, yeah, that big group there. And then there's also the patch in Surfside, there's Sconset, and Quidnet. Then the R10, where the heck is that?
I think the R10 is this light green color.
The green, yep, yep.
Here, here. These three are the big patches.
Right.
But here.
Okay, anybody else care to comment? Well, it appears like there's a willingness and it's a good idea. It's just fine tuning to see the minimum lot size and which zonings we're really interested in definitely including. But again, just to harp on the passability of it, we want to make sure that we're thinking of, you know, the entire island. We want to get this passed. So inclusion in a certain zone or excluding a certain zone to help pass it would be the consideration. Moving on to the next one, that's part of it, the expansion of tertiary dwellings gross floor area. I, for one, I'm for this, and I've been very kind of disappointed in past meetings where I've had to vote against certain new projects because it exceeded the 650 square feet interior tertiary, you know, gross living area. So I've stated that I'd be for expanding this. The question is to what extent and what do we think it would be going to, because it is quality of life. It's 650 square feet for a person is you know, it's not the Ritz, but it's doable. Once you add a couple of people in there, it gets to be a little tight. So if we can help with the whole concept of, you know, generally the tertiary dwellings are a little bit more affordable, renting out, and we are restricted to certain areas that you're going to be year-round residents there with a primary, secondary, and tertiary. So that tertiary is more or less going to be the third building, and hopefully it will increase rentability for people. So does anybody have a thought on the square footage? Has the staff thought of maybe a good number to expand it to?
Go ahead.
Dave?
I think
Go ahead,
what
Dave.
we discussed, and Andrew could maybe call me out if I'm wrong. I think we talked about two different ones. I think it was 800, expanding it to 800 for an accessory tertiary and 1,000 for a standalone. Is that right, Andrew?
Yes, that's what we discussed, right?
Oh, I thought it was. When you say accessory, you mean basement apartment? I thought we were doing the opposite, but that's okay. I got you. And what about garage apartment, Andrew? We gotta get that fixed. Because the
Right.
one I'm sitting in right now is about 650. And if we could have made it just a hair bigger, it would have been more usable and not been a big difference. Like, I think that we need to definitely have two different numbers for, I guess, for three different units. In other words, the living space above a garage, the basement one, and then a freestanding unit, Dave.
Nat, would
In other
we,
words, whatever we think should be hopefully two numbers for three things, I was hoping.
Nat, do you think it might be advantageous to group the accessory and the garage apartment with that 800 square feet? So you don't have to create three different things?
Because
Right, that's what I'm saying, something like that.
and right now, garage apartments are based on the footprint of the garage, correct?
Yeah, but it can't be a tertiary if you build a second dwelling, and now that becomes the tertiary and you're stuck with a waiver. So in other words, Dave, okay, I should have been a little bit more clear with what I said. When I did my project, I built this purposely for the size of a tertiary, even though it isn't anything right now, but it will be, when I'm 70 probably or something. So there's going to be a second dwelling someday. You don't want to make it so that
No, I get it, yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, if you already know the answer. So if people are building their properties thinking ahead now, it's not like it was in the, back in the day when everybody just built whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. So my thought was to have the garage apartment size above the garage be tied to one of the other tertiary options, so that we don't have three different living space pieces in this bylaw. The standalone one's an easy one to do, because that's easy to talk about. A small 2-story house size, a tiny one or a slightly bigger one. You know what I mean? There's ways of, that's an easy one to talk about. But the basement one is, in the garage apartment one, is a little bit different, because there's certain size garages that are standard 28 by 28, kind of thing, where you end up with a 1 or 2 room, unit. So that's what I was trying to get at, John. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I got confused.
No,
on
no,
that.
and I think just for anyone else listening in that's outside our board, it does get to be very mathematically complicated when you look at a first dwelling, a primary dwelling, and then a second dwelling being 80% the size of the first dwelling, but it doesn't necessarily count as gross living area. It counts as square footage on the ground. That opens up the square footage for a tertiary, where you're only going to get 650 interior gross living finished space. So by playing around the numbers a little bit and maybe making the standalone 1,000 square feet, in essence, you can have a 20 by 25 that's left in your ground cover that becomes 500 square feet, and put 2 floors in there, and that would actually still quantify as a tertiary with 1,000 square feet interior. So you really, every individual property is different. That's why we take it on a case-by-case basis. But establishing the square footage minimum and maximum when you're looking at 1,000 square feet for a standalone, I think that's a good number. And I think that would help a lot of people that have come before us with buildings that have already existing, where we can have a little bit more flexibility to approve those, and other buildings that are already present that people are picking up and moving to refurbish. That helps with those type of things. But I think grouping in the accessory and the garage apartment for the 800 square feet of interior gross living space, that would help the position that you're in, Nat, with your example of your garage.
Yeah. No, you made more sense than me, John. That was very good, because it's hard to explain it.
Yeah,
Now, can I just quickly go over the Boys and Girls Club thing? to
sure.
kinda,
Yeah,
like,
that's the one
refresh that one.
Yeah,
So, as I recall, their original application was for 1,000,
correct.
right? And then they went down to whatever it was. In a basement, how do I say this? It's an existing size space regardless because of the dwelling that they're building. So I feel that 850 is, or whatever we just said, I think we said
800.
850, right?
800.
800.
800, okay. So is a lot better than 650 because they're still gonna have to close off some space for the utilities and that kind of thing.
Right.
But at least it's not like half the basement like it was with that application. So I think that, but the other part I wanted to bring up is I hope that we can, because the original was 550 when this first came out, whatever year that
It
was.
might have
now I
been
can't
500
remember.
back then.
It was 500? I thought it was
Might have been
550. But
500.
anyway,
Yeah.
so it'd be nice if we wrap this up now, like, and never have to touch this again, hopefully. Because we learned a lot about this. The existing units that have been, basically legalized, codified, whatever you want to call it, because they were already built, and it kind of cleans things up for people on their properties and gives them some choices. But I think we're pretty close to the right number. Sounds like, John.
Sure. Anybody else on the board? Fritz, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, this discussion is under the heading of affordable housing articles. I guess one thing I just want to point out is that all tertiaries aren't affordable housing. So by increasing the square footage, I mean, could we increase the square footage only for year-round or affordable housing? I mean, because what we're seeing is tertiaries, primary, secondary, tertiaries, on a big lot, big house, and all it's going to do is make that additional dwelling bigger. And when it has nothing to do with affordable housing, year-round housing, or anything else. That's just my comment.
Dave.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, Fritz, but I feel, for one, I mean, if they're building a tertiary, it is supposed to be occupied by a year-round rental, right? So I think
And have to be. Tertiaries or in the same ownership or year-round housing.
But I think that I think we're going to be in a position of policing this, and I understand your concern, but I think that in the end it will open up more opportunities. And I mean, maybe if that's your concern, maybe then it's just the accessory tertiary. But I think that it's about opening up opportunities to create more housing, whether it's affordable under the guise of what fits in that little box, or it's just bedrooms available for rent.
So Fritz, sorry, Dave, you're doing.
No, go ahead, Joe.
Fritz, if I know you've stated this before, and I know exactly what you're trying to accomplish, and I'm just wondering, and you might have mentioned this, is if we make the square footage 800 and 1,000, there is a way, if we wanted to leave the present as it is and give an incentive to increase to 800 or 1,000 if they would agree to put it into an affordable, some type covenant or not covenant, but a designation.
Year-round housing.
Yes.
All right, something. So that would be fine.
I mean,
Andrew, if I could intervene, could you comment on that? Does that make it too complicated, or is that something that has merit?
No, I think that we could. So right now, at least for the dwelling owned by a not-for-profit religious or educational entity, or subject to the limiting the occupancy to year-round housing, if we said that you could expand it for those two categories, then the first category in the definition is, it just says same ownership of at least one other owner occupied dwelling. So if you didn't make it available to that first category, but the latter two, I think that kind of targets it.
Yeah, I think in the case of Boys and Girls Club that I'll say for the record, I had to vote nay against. I think in this particular case, if it was all for affordable employee workforce housing, I would have been able to vote in the positive, given it the up to the 800 square feet. But from a private residence to go to the 800 square feet, if it's not going to be available for affordability or workforce, then it could be restricted under the present 650 square feet. So that might be a nice compromise to give people incentive to build for an affordable rental. I'm seeing Dave shake. Cam, I know you've had your hand up. Thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was waiting for Dave to go. So I'd like to just say I sort of support what you were just saying, John, but also Fritz's concerns. I mean, on the one hand, this is being proposed under affordable housing, and on the other hand, the larger discussion seems to be about, that isn't really even coming into the conversation. I remember when homes were smaller. A 30 by 30 is 900 square feet, and it seems to fit, a family nicely enough. I think the modern concept that every bedroom it needs its own bathroom and everything has to be larger and bigger, I don't think should overall supported as a goal. So I'm trying to find a way I could support this to town meeting, I guess is what I'm saying. So where it's related to what you were mentioning, John, and you were willing to do the 800, I would go for that. That is just not even. That's not a tertiary. When you get too big, you're talking about creating an apartment building in a home that, if you have 3 dwelling units, you've got a primary, secondary, and a tertiary, it's a lot of traffic, it's a lot of cars. And anyway, I just think that a tertiary is supposed to be smaller. The idea is not that it be a big footprint. But anyways, that was sort of where I was with what.
Keep in mind, Cam, you made a comment of it, like years ago, 30 by 30, 900 square feet was a decent sized home. And that may have been true, but the rents now, if you're looking to buy a house that's 30 by 30, you're probably looking at a minimum of $1.5 to $2 million. And that doesn't necessarily bode well for someone that's looking to rent. So we don't want to squeeze 2 people or 3 people or a child in a house that's 650 square feet if they're not going to be able to afford $2 million. But to expand it to the 800 or to the 1,000 for freestanding, with the incentive to make it affordable, it has some merit with that in that regard.
And so I was hearing your argument to that point, which was why I was willing to go to the 800. But I think the 1,000 is, you're still not creating an inexpensive place to live. And I realized that, the likes of McLean Lane, after that house blew up in it, that was historically, 1.5 stories was historically the size of homes, the workforce housing. And now it's going to be 2.5 stories, like what is the blown up house, which will, I admit, will help the elementary school come into proportion a little bit better. But so that's just my thoughts on it. So just piping up.
Thank you, Cam.
John, Mr. Chairman, can I just reel this back in for a second, if you don't mind? So let's go back to before the tertiary was adopted, okay? Think about where we were thinking then. It was a unanimous vote at town meeting. I couldn't believe it. Richard Ray was out of his mind, so happy about this idea. I think it was the first thing he ever said good about the planning office. But anyway, so that, what was the first thing in our hearings? That we were going to get existing dwellings sort of legalized.
Basement apartments,
Okay.
et cetera. Yeah.
And that's what happened. I mean, I don't know how many are still illegal technically, but I can tell you what, there's a lot of them that aren't now, okay? But what you got to realize, and I hope Cam understands what I say, because I'm not so sure I'm going to be able to say it right the first time, so hopefully I do. What we're doing now is sort of taking I guess, the experience that we've had in the last 6 or 7 years, however long this has been in, to make a sort of an improvement to what the trends are, okay? So let's say somebody has the ground cover for this larger tertiary, but they don't, if we make that a special permit to make it be for housing or year round or whatever was just said, they can already make their second dwelling bigger. They can already make, in other words, they can do something else with one of the other dwellings. So I'm looking at this as efficiency of dwellings, usable units for the future, because it isn't free to build a house. I mean, it is crazy expensive. So why would you want to restrict someone to make a one-room house or a two, basically, barely, than to be able to have a couple hundred more feet of living space to make that dwelling more usable down the road? Hopefully, when we start talking about this double covenant thing, that will all sort of fit this conversation with this larger tertiary. So I don't see it as, well, it has to be for housing to be bigger. That is sort of not really an issue in this case. I think it's to make the people's property more realistically usable in a sort of a permanent situation than just saying, oh, this is all you can build, see you later. You know what I mean? Because I mean, if they already have more ground cover to use on something else, they're going to eventually use it. So that's how I'm looking at it. Hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Nat.
Okay. Sorry, Cam.
Hey, no worries. I like to
Trying
hear
to figure out how to explain that is not easy.
Dave Callahan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I still agree with Fritz on this issue.
Oh, you froze.
I think we froze out on us, Dave. Or is it just me?
Yeah.
Or
I don't know what happened.
we'll get back to you, Dave. I see Andrew's hand up.
All of them. And
Yeah, I
maybe-
mean, oh, he's back. Are you back, Dave?
Hello.
Oh,
You're
That's
back.
Dave Callahan. You're back. Okay.
All right. I lost my.
Froze out on us.
Dave cut me off down the street. But I think that, in a 1,000 square foot standalone building is a substantial rental unit. So I don't mind that. I'd like to see, just for simplicity, all of them 800 square feet, maybe allow 1,000 square feet on a second floor of that instead of 1,000 square feet of ground cover on a lot.
Well, it's not, yeah. The standalone is not a ground cover. We're still looking at tertiary in the sense where it's a interior. So it's not on the ground cover, because then it would be a 2,000 square foot
But it
tertiary.
could be 1,000 square feet of ground cover.
It could be, yeah,
Yeah.
with single floor with no basement or ranch, yes.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I cut him off.
That's an important point to make, John, what you just said, to separate that.
Yeah. Dave Iverson,
No,
you're-
I agree with Dave and Fritz, but there has to be a way where we can only allow that extra if it's for year-round housing, and then, if there's a way to restrict that since we're talking bonuses, that bonus square footage, it should be restricted for year-round housing.
Mhm.
And I think that's a very good call by both, Dave,
Dave, I'm going to give you a chance to try and speak one more time, Dave Callahan, without freezing out. Go ahead.
Hello, I've been raising my hand
Oh,
too.
I just wanted to get David. He's been cut out twice. So
Give it to Andrew.
all right, go ahead, Andrew.
I think we've got the idea. So we'll definitely, draft the article to explore some of these concepts so you can have a further discussion about it. I do want to remind you all that, tertiaries are not allowed in every district. So you need to remember that they're allowed in 7 districts, R5, R10, R20, R40, and Lug 1, 2, 3. So they're not allowed in the ROH district, for example, and not in the country, in like Village Residential or some of the other ones. So, and also it's important to remember that there is a bedroom count limitation based on square footage that applies in R5, R10, and R20. And that is not changing because of this bylaw. That was something that when I discussed this with the housing group, they wanted to be sure that, we are not increasing that density, changing that count basically, because there are units that, on the smaller lots, a 5,000 square foot lot, for example, with a 6-bedroom duplex is not going to be eligible for a tertiary based on the amount of the square footage. And if you need to look that up, it's in section 2, 139.2 of the bylaw for refresher.
So I just want to point out, as we're discussing this, the combinations are endless. So you have to think, if you're sitting in the audience at town meeting, how confusing it might be. So I think when we say the simplest form, the better. If we could, just limit it to maybe 800 square feet to accessory or garage, group it together instead of separately. We have to also point out the bedroom count, as Andrew said, and the limited zoning, 7 zoning areas that it could be limited to. So, people confuse 1,000 square feet with 1,000 square feet on the ground and not a complete gross living area. So, we have to just point that out, and anything we can do to get this passed by making it as simple and easy to understand as possible. That's what I would make a point to think about. Dave, your hand is still up, or is that
It's
left over?
it's still up.
Okay, go ahead.
No, it's good. I'm
Okay.
fine.
All right. I think, Andrew, you got a pretty good sense of what we're looking
Yes.
at. So maybe
Thank you.
some kind of draft form and we can fine tune a little bit more.
Yep.
Moving on to the 2 covenant lots on a single lot. Nat, I know you chomping at the bit to speak at this one, so.
No, I'm not chomping at the bit. I'm all worn out with it, to be honest. But so there's 2 different concepts for this thought, this concept, this idea. And it's something I think we should have already done because we've lost a lot of chances, but that's okay. It takes time to do the right thing. So the idea was to, if a person already has a covenant or doesn't have any second dwelling now and they have a primary or whatever, if they could build 2 covenants, but you could have the second covenant as secondary standards, meaning a larger building, not necessarily as big as I guess we'll call it the first secondary dwelling, but you would be able to build a second dwelling as a covenant, but it could be bigger only if it's a covenant, if you have the space, if you have the ground cover.
So if I'm understanding this, what you're speaking about, Nat, so anybody else can maybe think about it. If you had nothing changes on the ground cover, nothing changes on the limitations as far as the secondary dwelling and the tertiary and internal space, depending on what the town votes on with the previous discussion. So then you would actually benefit, instead of a true subdivision, you would be able to sell 2 buildings on your structure and get revenue and leave it in.
Still keep your primary dwelling.
Yeah, a standalone, and also a covenant of perpetuity, but regulated by the housing authority.
Housing Nantucket.
housing.
Yeah. So, and this is where we get into the conversation of a fresh lot versus something that's already built. And we deal with that with the 20% differential. We just did it the other night with the move on, move off, demolish one, which is, I can't remember anybody doing that in a while, but that's pretty awesome that they're doing it. The only thing that, you know, and Andrew and I have talked about this, got to Leslie about it, and one of the frequent meeting applicants I talked to about this. The problem that we're going to run into with this that we may have to discuss is a bonus, ground cover bonus for a lot that already has buildings on it. So like I say, a 1%, say somebody has a house that's, you know, if the primary is a little bit bigger than what, you know, makes two more fit, they'd have to build an awful small, let's call it the tertiary covenant. Okay. So in other words, they have to have a really small house to give them a bonus of a certain number of, I'm not sure what the percentage would be. We'd have to decide that with what's reasonable, but it would only apply if something's already on the ground. If somebody has a fresh lot, I mean, that's unrealistic. So following what I'm saying?
Yeah, similar to existing buildings that we have.
We do that already. We're already doing it.
800, they're looking for a waiver for a covenant.
Right.
Or a
Because
tertiary.
if somebody already has, especially in a lot of these R20 lots, that was sort of, this stuff was all rolling around in my head at the beginning of this meeting for the workforce housing. This sort of kind of helps that happen in these areas that have a lot of sort of old school houses on them, kind of in the wrong place, you know, or a larger building than what you do if it, say, was set up to be 3 dwellings on it. People weren't thinking about those things in the 80s, John. They just built the house and wait till the next time we're going to build a house. That's how it was. It isn't that way anymore. You have to figure out what you're doing once. Right. If you're smart.
And I think that's important when you say a year, there should be a specific designation on a year, because anybody with a fresh lot right now, knowing that maybe 5 years or 10 years down the line can take advantage of this by building an oversized lot, building a secondary dwelling that conforms to the 80% size, and then knowing that at some point, if they wanted to sell that and create a covenant lot, they'll get an exemption for that. I think we have to have a cutoff for existing or use a designated year so that nobody can go forth and take advantage of that.
Don't want to overcomplicate.
Right.
I just felt that it was easier to say if the land is, I mean, if it's being raised and they're tearing it down, that's fine. They're going to do what they're going to be able to fit. But if it's if there's a good primary dwelling built and they don't want to tear it down and they want to keep that house and there's just a shade underneath what they need to be to make a reasonable size third dwelling for a covenant, I think we should figure out what that number should be, whether it's, I don't know if it should be 1%. I mean, 1% is not a lot, you know what I mean? So that's why I just really, that's up to staff to figure that out, what that would come out to. In each zoning district is different, but you know, 1%, it'll still make a difference. So the other issue I'd like to bring up, because we kind of already kind of covered it, but I just want to go back to it, is the other idea I have is a tertiary covenant. So a lot of these places, I mean, I'm in all these people's yards, and I'm telling you, there's some big, huge properties out there that have the secondary dwelling is sort of part of their footprint of their primary. So you're never going to get a covenant out of some of these houses, but there's lots of land for a tertiary. And it kind of brings up Fritz's point about year round. To have, Andrew, what is the law about if you have a tertiary, somebody has to be living on the property, not in a specific unit, correct? It has to be somewhere on the property. Is that how it's written?
It has to be at least one owner. There has to be at least one other owner-occupied dwelling unit on the lot, or shall be owned for nonprofit, religious, educational entity, or shall be subject to a restriction.
So somebody could be living in the secondary dwelling or in the tertiary dwelling year-round for them to have 3 dwellings, correct? I know I'm making it a simpler question, right? So this idea of having a tertiary covenant would allow, and I'm not saying that there'd be that many of them, but I can tell you this, that there's a lot of people that will never make a covenant because they want their second dwelling for their family members or whatever the case may be. But to have an option for a tertiary covenant, to me, is no different than our current program. It's just a smaller house, but it's the same thing, but it'll be a cheaper house. It'll be less than 880,000, which is the current price, I believe, right now, 885 or whatever it is. So it sort of creates another market, another option for more covenants, because we need a lot more of them. That's really the future home ownership for Nantucketers, in my opinion, down the road when we're all a lot older. So
I do want to agree with you.
I think it makes a
Matt.
lot of sense.
People assume that bigger house tertiary is really important. There are a lot of people that choose to be single, and they don't want a roommate, and they're forced to either, when we get so large with a tertiary or a secondary or something like that, even the covenant homes become out of their price range. So if you were able to even be considered or consider a smaller tertiary that you can put into a covenant, even if it was at a 500, 600, 800 square feet for a single person to be able to afford, I think there, as you said, there is another market for that. And that's one of the reasons why in the houses or the apartments and things that we're approving these days, we ask for studio apartments as well as 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms, because it will definitely identify with a lot of people on the island. So it does have some merit with that, with the tertiary covenants.
And again, I don't know how that stuff gets set with housing Nantucket. I'm not sure how that all works, to be honest, with the land and the building and how they come up with those calculations. But this is sort of, in my mind, is like a sort of a slightly less than a traditional covenant. Okay, so whatever that number comes out to, I don't, that's for somebody else to figure out. But I appreciate what you said, John. That's my thought, is that there's an option for someone to sell off their tertiary lot and not, you know what I mean? Like, it's sort of the same exact thing we're doing now, but with the 3rd dwelling option instead of the 2nd.
Right.
Okay, and it's not adding ground cover. It's not adding what can't be built. That's the key to this. This is not a subdivision. That word still gets thrown around. I hear it on the radio and I cringe in my truck every time I hear it. And it's crazy. We need to make sure that everyone understands that the covenant program is not adding ground cover, adding buildings, adding land that is not already buildable now. Okay. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully I get support on this somehow.
Anyone else on the board have a comment before we move on? Okay, next we have discussion of the planning board sponsored articles. If there's any editing or additional text or something that be removed that you've thought of, members, there's the RC2 phase out articles, and the first one, there's I think 4 of them there we're looking at. One was the remaining Nobody Farm Road parcels. 2, the Perry Lane Bartlett Road to CTEC.
Hey, John?
Yes, Andrew.
Sorry, can I, so again, as staff, we've met and we have a few changes to this, which I can go over with you.
Sure.
So on the first item, the remaining Nobody Farm parcels, we want to continue with a subset of 6 parcels that are sort of in one specific location near Sun Island Road. So there still will be some other ones that need future work, but again, what we would like to do is concentrate on the 6 parcels that are in one area. On the next one, the west side of Arrowhead Drive to SeaTech, we think that's good.
Maybe Meg, did we remove this from the agenda? Or did I get an updated staff?
Yeah, I circulated, just with strikeout. I think Andrew's just trying to explain the rationale behind why staff chose to remove it from the
Oh,
list.
okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Andrew, I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. So the west side of Arrowhead Drive to SeaTech is something, again, that is likely to be very involved. We think we're probably not going to be ready for that this year. The next item, east side of Surfside Road near Windy Way and My Comet Avenue. I think, again, we have some, it's really a group of family property owners that we need to spend some time with that we think we're probably not going to have that time this year. Basically would put that one off. Perry Lane and Bartlett Road is a single parcel that we skipped over last year, so we want to finalize that one out. So that one would stay. Nobska Way, there's two areas here where there's a concentration of RC2 left, which is Nobska and Salrose. And rather than divide them into two, we think we want to do all of them at once, again, in a future article. Let Raceway to SeaTech and R10, we want to focus on the R10 group, and that's 3 particular properties. And Meox's Way at Bartlett, there's a number of split lots here, and we want to focus on, again, that particular area, which is on Bartlett Farm Road on the way to the farm area. So with RC2, as you know, we started with over 1,400 acres of this particular zoning district. We are now in an area of, I think 90 acres or so. So again, we continue to chip away at this. In the master plan, we did give ourselves plenty of time for this. As you who have been on the board for some time know that these take time, but I will say we're in some relatively small areas as we sort of move the last bits of this.
Okay,
Just a question,
Fritz.
I meant.
Yeah.
What are the other areas that that weren't on this list, I guess?
Megan, can you pull up the
originally-
zoning map?
I mean, there are a lot of areas left, or is it just?
Well, there's 90
Yeah, let's-
acres left.
Let's look at the map and you'll see, I think, so it's the orange areas that are shown here. If you go out, Megan. This is all in the town overlay district. If we start from the west, Megan, can you go out a little bit further so we can get some more detail?
Yeah, what side do you want me to start? In Nantucket side, out towards the west?
Yes, please. So that's the brewer, the Cisco Brewery site, right. Have a pointer, Megan, or no?
Have my mouse.
If you bring your mouse to the west, there's a right there. So that's the Cisco Brewery site.
Mhm.
The triangular piece sort of to the south, that's the Meox's parcel that we're working on. Then if you go east to the group, that's at the corner of Raceway Drive and Somerset Road. That's also the area that we're working on. If you go to the southeast, Megan, along my comment, there's a single parcel there that's not included in this year's group of articles. You go to the north, that's the Nobska Salrose group. The single parcel in the middle of the right there, which is on Bartlett Road, that's one of our proposed articles for this year. Next group is Surfside Road, My Comet Ave, which we're going to hold off on. The way across, you see the that group is Holgate property off of Old South Road. And again, there's been some family division type issues there. The next biggest group, that's Egan Lane and Pinecrest, which has a number of those small lots. And again, we're working with that neighborhood on correcting the access issues, which is very complicated. That probably will be the last area that we do. And then if you could blow that area up, Megan, you'll see the detail in that particular group. So the northerly group right in there is what we propose to get done this year. There's a couple odd parcels down to the south that still need, those property owners are still working out some issues. And the RC2 in at Arrowhead is that last area, which is semi-industrial, heavy-duty commercial.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So on to the RC phase-out articles. So is there on the ones that we want to remove at this point is and Megan, could you put that? I think that map would be helpful to put up. So the RC, there's less than 30 acres of this left. And again, this was the original commercial district that was part of zoning. It's that bright blue area. So you have the downtown Harbor Place commercial wharf sub area, which is the area surrounded by the dark red. Yep, right where you're. And we're not sure on what, if we're ready to do any rezoning in there or not. That's sort of a placeholder at this time. At the end of Washington Street, see that there's 4 RC parcels left. Further south, right here, that we would propose to include in this year's rezoning. That's it for this group. So what's left to do here is these various parcels along Washington Street and at the corner of Washington and Francis. Parcels that have already been rezoned to R40 are land bank parcels or parcels where the houses have been removed, opening up those parcels to the harbor. It's likely that the remaining RC would go to that. And then still left to do is the area of Marine Home Center and that one last group on Orange.
If I can just interrupt real quick. Megan texted me and said she lost her internet connection, so she'll have to reconnect, so there's no map at the moment.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on to the next, the R1 phase out. The SR1 was dependent on the area, the Wisconsin area plan, and at this point, we're really not ready to introduce changes to that district, so that needs to be deferred. Vesper Lane, Cato Lane, Woodland Hills subdivision is an area that we want to pursue with the R5 limited zoning district. That has not been mapped yet, so that would be the first particular area. That
So Andrew,
includes,
I don't know who's tuning in that's outside in the public, but changing it to the R5 limited, could you shed some light on what the limited would include?
sure. So
Yeah.
currently in R5, basically, the main difference is that duplexes are allowed in R5 limited, they are not. And second dwellings are allowed by right in R5 regular, and in R5 limited, they're by special permit. So the board does have the ability to put conditions on special permits in that particular zoning district.
Thank you.
Otherwise,
Can I ask a question through John
Sure.
to
go
you,
ahead.
Andrew? R5L is not going to allow tertiaries, correct? I know there's probably no space for any on those lots, but I think this is a really good idea. So I just want to make sure that that's correct.
correct.
Okay, because those places, I mean, if we had we could turn the clock back a few years, we would have put this in somehow already. You know what I mean, Andrew? Because what are
Yep.
those lots? Average size is what, 7,500, something like
Yes.
that? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. This is good. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe we'll have to revisit when Megan gets back on the map. So there's technical amendment to the zoning map for Richmond. There's certain areas there where the R5 and CN district, which was dedicated before the final subdivision was approved. So there's some mismatches that we want to have corrected through there. And there's some other areas where we have a split lot. We try to remove those whenever they exist, where a lot is partially in one district, partially in another. So again, we'll have more details when the maps are developed on those. So those would proceed forward. Leslie, do you want to go over your zoning bylaw amendments, your technical amendments?
Sure. So the first one, you all may recall that you can approve a second driveway as part of the second dwelling application without holding a public hearing. That same language is not in the tertiary dwelling bylaw, so we would like to add that for both tertiary dwellings and garage apartments. That would eliminate,
Go ahead.
that would just eliminate the public hearing process because you can already do some of it without it. So we just thought that would be more consistent.
Can you just tell me where that language is?
The current language, hold on, I don't have my bylaw open, but it's in section 20.1.
Yeah.
To that, and we can put it in your packet for next time.
We'll come back, Meg, if we need to pull up maps.
Sorry, hazards of my house being an ongoing construction zone. Wi-Fi was cut.
All right. Let's see, that is in section 20.1.
And I think it's H maybe? 2H.
I'm just scrolling.
All secondary dwellings approved by the planning board
Yep.
shall have combined driveway access. However, the planning board may approve separate access for such dwellings on lots that are not expressly permitted to driveway accesses upon a finding. That second access would not adversely affect the neighborhood. So, but there was nothing in, that's secondary dwellings. You were saying garage apartments. Are you? I
Yeah, so-
thought at one point we were separating out garage apartments from secondary dwellings.
They're a separate defined term in the bylaw. So we would add to section H, all secondary dwellings, tertiary dwellings, and garage apartments.
Okay,
By special
so when you're saying correcting the language, what you're saying is you're adding the language to allow
Yes.
secondary driveways in a garage apartments and tertiary dwellings.
Yes.
Because technically those things came in when we didn't clean it up when they were adopted. It's what it sounds like. Oh my
Yes.
God. It's so many little pieces. Can I ask Leslie a question, John, real quick?
Sure, go for it.
I don't want to make the meeting take too long because I know there's other topics that are going to be much more important. But Leslie, remember I asked you after our wonderful public hearing process for 8 New Mill that I just can't ever forget for the rest of my life?
Mhm.
So I happened to be down at 19 Lily Street not too long ago, where we approved that little tiny, barely fits a smart car second curb cut that doesn't take away a parking space. Remember that project? That was before 8 New Mill. And I was looking around, and I've been looking at this stuff more closely now than ever since that 8 New Mill situation. And there are a lot of, I'm going to call them parking lot primary curb cuts in the ROH. And I think that, I'm not saying for this year's town meeting, but unless you can whip something together fast enough, I'm not sure. Because you get this stuff. When we look at this stuff, we need to be able to have a little bit more direction especially in town, because you go to someone's house that has enough room for 4 cars because the house was built 200 years ago and there's all this space and they got this gigantic brick parking area. And then you get another house that is lucky to find a spot for 1 small car to fit beyond their maybe 1.5 cars in their other curb cut. To me, that's why I always say we need to look at these separately. Every one of them is different, but everybody thinks differently. And the board's going to change and people have a different mindset. And what happened at that application was unacceptable, in my opinion. Okay, what happened with the public being so angry over something like that? Never seen it before in my life, since I've been doing this. So I thought that there could be something added in these smaller lots downtown where existing conditions have to play a factor in the decision that we make, because some people have a huge parking area, 200 feet away. So that's all I'm saying. And I'm not saying that that's something that we should have an article for, or not, or a change in the language of our second curb cut language, but it's certainly a lot different downtown than it is anywhere else on the island.
And that,
So,
I agree
thank
with
you.
what you're saying, and I don't want to complicate it by adding something, because in the 6 or 7 years that I've been on the board, really have only come across a couple of issues like that. So the percentage and the track record is pretty good that we only have to deal with it every 7 years. So I don't want to introduce something that would create
No.
more of a havoc right now if we only have to bring it up once every 7 years.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I understand your frustration. It was a little difficult, and it got resolved one way or the other, to the satisfaction or dissatisfaction of the neighbors. But it's beyond us now, and let's wait for the next
It'll
one.
come up again.
Another,
It'll happen again.
hopefully another 7 years.
Okay,
Just
so
one more comment.
Sure.
And
Chris.
we don't need to discuss it. I'll just give my comment to Leslie. Doesn't C, I'll just add that comment. Doesn't C, the last paragraph in that section, do what you want to do? We can waive any requirement of 20.1 by special permit.
you can, this would allow you to do it without holding a public hearing to grant a special permit.
Got it.
It would put the same process in place for tertiary dwellings and garage apartments that already exists for secondary dwellings for driveway access.
Okay.
All right, so the next item on the list, alter the definition of tent to allow for an extension by special permit. The tent definition has some requirements about the number of days in a calendar year that a tent can be erected. You can only extend that by variance, which has very strict criteria that usually don't apply. And this really came out of the economic task force that I'm on, and out of, some of the changes that businesses made to adapt to COVID. Quite a few of them put up tents in various locations on their properties. I think a lot of them would like to keep it. I think a lot of people positively responded to having additional outdoor dining options. So this would allow the tent timeframe to be extended by special permit so they can keep those up for the season. All right, the next one, we've also had sort of an influx of food truck applications, not the planning board, but through licensing and town administration. And there are zoning implications for food trucks depending on, if they're parked in a specific location or if they're more mobile. You have reviewed at least one permit for a food truck at Richmond, and you all granted the permit. And we've been treating it as takeout, but that's not clearly defined. So we think that that needs, some more specifics in the bylaw. So there's more clarity for everyone on that.
Yeah, with that having owned a takeout business, I guess it wouldn't really affect anything as far as the health department. The food truck would still be required to have a commercial kitchen that they're working out of, that's inspected annually, et cetera. The language of the food truck wouldn't necessarily change the health requirements, correct?
Correct. I mean, what's really come up, some of the food truck owners didn't understand that there was a zoning piece. They didn't understand that if they, have negotiated a space to park it with a business owner, that they still have to have parking available, that, it is takeout in some districts that's not allowed at all. In some, it's only allowed by special permit. So, and licensing didn't fully understand that either. So we're also working on, aside from this concept, some more streamlined licensing for the business owners so that they know, everything that they have to do.
Great, thank you.
All right. So the next one, which is not a technical amendment, but a change to the regularity factor. The formula would remain the same, but instead of relief by variance, we would change that to special permit. The second one, short-term rentals. I think Andrew will get into that one in more detail later, so I'm going to skip over that for right now. I don't know if we're going to have any articles from the Cannabis Advisory Committee. I think Dave is on that. Have you talked about anything? No?
No, we've met we've met once since the pandemic started, so we haven't really, I don't think we've gotten anything together yet that I know of.
Okay.
So that's a no.
The additional covenant units, we already talked about that as part of the affordable housing trust articles. And then the open space bylaw, that is something that we just don't have the capacity to move forward with at this time. And then the real estate, I mean, those aren't for your review necessarily, but just on your list so that you know that we are working on things that aren't related to zoning, that takes up, staff time and attention.
Great. Home rule petition, et cetera, on the real estate. So now we're moving on to, I guess, the citizen warrant articles for discussion. Again, we're not opening this up to the public for each individual citizen to speak on their article. We're just discussing it amongst the board and staff. So.
And Mr. Chairman, could I just say that, so we do have the form has been distributed to all the applicants that you all voted. So we have not received all those. By the time we have our hearing, I'm sure those will be, part of your packets. And if there are, or if there's information or questions that the board has on any of these articles, we'd like you to make sure to let us know in advance. Again, with time, there's not a lot of extra time, and for things that are going to take a lot of research, we want to make sure to have the answers for you. But a lot of questions asked at the public hearing, we're not going to be able to necessarily respond. So, all right. So if there's any questions you have or things.
I see the date that the questionnaires are due by Monday, December 6th. If the applicant hasn't responded or sent in any responses by December 6th, how does that work out? Is that affecting when we discuss it for their ability to chime in on it in January?
Well, I think we're putting an early date to make sure we get them gathered up in time to distribute to. If we don't hear from them, we will be following up with them, I'm sure.
Okay.
Are those questionnaires for just the zoning map changes or all changes?
Zoning
Well,
map.
Distributed it to all. I mean, the board has only asked for those in the past for zoning map changes, but we've distributed. I think the questionnaire was sent out to all articles. So it's a little bit above and beyond what the board had voted. Is that correct, Megan? I think you and I discussed that.
Yeah, so it was sent out to all zoning article sponsors, both map and bylaw.
Yeah, and my only point would be there may be some questions in that questionnaire that are kind of that may seem odd or inappropriate for non-zoning map changes. But I'm just asking the question.
Okay, Andrew, how would you like to work this for each individual one? Do we just want to?
So I think, Megan, you have the maps. I think our GIS coordinator has actually developed maps, so we can put that up for you just to take a look at. But, in general, the first two deal with a similar area. This is along Old South Road. The current properties are zoned R20, and the proposed zoning is C-Tech. Yeah, thank you. That's perfect. So the first bulleted article is that group of properties, which is 6 properties there. You can see the area in purple, which were 6 properties rezoned at the last town meeting near the corner of Old South Road and Airport Road. And then the next bulleted property is just a single property. There.
Are you seeing this one too?
We see that. I see it.
Okay.
So anyway, that's what that particular article is about. And I think that the R20 is a residential district, 20,000 square foot minimum lot size. The C-Tech district is a commercial trade entrepreneur and craft commercial district with a 10,000 square foot minimum lot size. So. Next, 2 related articles are about hot tubs and spas. And at the last meeting, you had a presentation by the article's proponent on that. Question we had was, does anyone feel that there should be sort of a survey? We can certainly assist in that and getting mailing labels or anything if that's something the board is interested in following up on.
Yeah, Andrew, I think it's probably it would be helpful if the staff could at least provide the person that's sponsoring it a list of the properties or that are going to be so they can send out surveys for the zoning areas. Obviously, they're not just going to blanket and send out to the entire island, but for the designated areas that they're thinking about, it just to provide the information. It's a computer click away for us, and it might help them. We don't necessarily have to pay for the survey, or if they want to do a little bit of research on it to present their case a little bit more strongly, then they can do that. But if we could supply at least the information of the neighbors, that might be helpful.
I would just point out, I think we just got a memo, I think, just before the meeting from the proponent. And she just notes that the town association voted to support a survey. And it looks like she's saying would want to work closely with them to flesh that out. So sounds like it's a good idea. Everybody's in favor of it. I just wanted to point out that said something about the town association doing it or being involved.
Great. I mean, we certainly can get, the labels printed and do whatever to help move that along. So it's great.
I think that'd be helpful.
Okay. Anything else on this? Next is a map change. This is at Nobody Way. This area is currently zoned R20 and is proposed to go to R10 limited. Again, the difference between regular R10 and R10 limited is the same difference that we talked about with R5 versus R5 limited. So duplexes would not be allowed. Second dwellings would only be allowed by special permit, and tertiary dwellings are not allowed. This area actually is fairly non-conforming to the current R20 and more consistent with at least the R10 lot sizes. I'm sure we'll hear more from them. Generally, that's what we're talking about in this particular area.
So just so I understand, what does the zoning change permit them to do they cannot do now?
So change would be,
So Andrew, right now, it almost, we always use Pine Valley as a reference.
Yep.
But from a R20 here, we're changing it to an R10 limited. So you would, obviously if there were second dwellings by special permit.
right, and the ground cover is larger in R10 than in R20. So that's the main change. R20 is 12.5%. R10 is 25%. So the trade-offs to that, though, are, again, second dwellings aren't allowed by right, which they are allowed right now. You would have to get a special permit for a second dwelling. Now, properties largely move from non-conforming to conforming.
Okay.
Andrew, could I go back to that, the one previously, the pool? I just remembered there was a comment made about the mathematical work for the gallons. And I just wanted to bring up that because I would like a little bit more clarification from that.
Yep.
Because the example that we had gotten in our recent letter from the sponsor was a little confusing because it almost looked like it was catering towards the mathematical equation that they wanted to make it look like it was, it was tiered down. There were multiple levels, and they gave a nice diagram, but I don't know if it's truly reflective of how many gallons would the spa would be. They call it a 10 by 10, and then they taper it from 7 by 7 and 4 by 4, and they show the gallons as it's being tapered down. So I'm just curious what the discrepancy or how we would figure out the gallon limitation would be.
I think what we'll make sure to include in your packet is, how to calculate all this, because 1,000 gallons is really, I think it's just not really viable. And when you convert it to cubic feet, I think that's more helpful when you sort of imagine this. So anyway, I will make sure to include that in the packet. I think we could spend a lot of time talking about that right now. That it's something that we'll make sure to show some examples of that for your packet. Public hearing.
Great. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Next article is a zoning change definition. In the bylaw right now, there are basically a density standard for apartments in the commercial districts, and this is under 139.2 of the bylaw. So what this proposes is to allow the planning board to vary these standards by special permit. There are situations that I'm aware of where, depending on the size of the apartment, oh, thank you, Megan. So if you go to the actual apartment building, that's requires a special permit. The apartments are allowed by right. And some of these standards kind of work to prevent what might be otherwise, perfectly reasonable apartments, depending on certain areas. So anyway, this was, when this was adopted, we did our best to try to, create a situation where there were oversized lots required when certain mixed-use apartments were included. But we'll hear more, I believe, from the proponent at town meeting about some specifics where otherwise this requires you to go get a variance, and a variance really isn't the appropriate relief because it's not a hardship situation. It's really a policy-based situation. Questions on that? Next two articles.
Just you said we'd get more elaboration at town meeting, but we're going to need more elaboration before town meeting.
I'm sorry, Fritz, I misspoke. At our public hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I knew what you meant, Andrew, but yeah, Fritz, good call.
Sorry about that. Getting late here. Okay, the next two articles are about swimming pools, which again, this should be very familiar to you all. One article would basically, I guess, eliminate the changes that were voted at the last annual town meeting. The second article would, or I guess in reverse order, the first one listed here, lowers the threshold of the lot size from 7,500 to 6,000 square feet. And then the other article would reverse the parameters of the vote from last year. So it's fairly explanatory. Any requests or search or anything that anyone wants to say?
Andrew, just maybe you can help me out with something. It hasn't even been a year. We introduced that, we compromised, we brought it down, or brought it up to brought it down from the 10,000 to the 7,500 square feet. We did a lot of compromising to get it so that was palatable for the town to vote on, and it did pass. So we're introducing this article less than a year later to, number one, try and eliminate it. Number two, to reduce it again down from 7,500 to 6,000. How many houses, pools in the R1 has this affected? And has it affected so many that it would warrant us to support this only after one year? And I know that Nat and I kind of hashed over this and made that compromise to 7,500. And it wasn't something that we 100% strongly supported, but it was something that we felt was, going to help to get it passed if it was going to pass. So I kind of, and I may be speaking out of turn, but I'm almost saying that I'm opposed to this before it's even introduced, because we haven't even had enough time to see how it would affect the properties that we made this, that we created this article or sponsored this article to affect. And we're already changing it. And I'd like to hear from the other board, including
Mr.
yourself.
Chairman,
I
don't want you to get too far ahead of what you said isn't incorrect by any stretch here, but I don't think we should really get into the merits of the article. What you did say is true. We can certainly provide you with, we can provide you with, who didn't or didn't make, so as of September 30th, basically you had to have a building permit or the bylaw went into effect. So, but I think, this is citizen articles. This has not been submitted by you all on the board or staff. It's,
I understand, and this is this is what's really great about a citizen warrant article. Somebody has a thought, they can put it in writing, submit it, and then they bring it to us. If we see the merits in it, we can sponsor it and support it. If we don't, we give it a negative. And I think it's just, I'm not going to speak for the entire board. It's just my opinion that we haven't had a chance to really implement this and see how many people it would affect, and if it created hardship, or if it's one person that it affected that are trying to change it a year later. So that's my 2 cents, and I'll leave it at that. And if anybody else on the board wants to comment, I'll open it up for that. No? Okay.
I just want to.
You probably know my feelings on that.
Okay. Okay. Nat, you're saying something?
I want to just ask Andrew, since we have this other article, the one that we haven't really discussed yet from Ann Deweese. Andrew, the article that we passed for the 7,500 in R1, and is it a little bit of R5? There's that little confusion there, right?
no, it's R5,
So
R1.
Okay,
R5 limited.
that the original intent, John, and I know that you and I talked about this. It was to eliminate that A&R boom bang zip boom to make 2 lots to just build 2 big pools, or not big, but you know what I mean. Just to do it for fun, just because they can. That was sort of the intent. But that article, Andrew, this is my technical question now to you, makes those areas into basically the same as the ROH size pool, correct? The 15 by 10 that is under discussion now. In other words, if the lot was under 7,500, they can still build. They can build the spa, small, that no bigger than 15 by 10. It basically turns it into the same regulation that those lots had, correct? That was the understanding that I had, or we had, or whatever.
So what you're saying is, there's the one article that just would disallow the hot tub spa in the ROH. And that's
right. I'm talking about what we're currently allowed to do in ROH would be what happens in the R1 and R5 smaller than 7,500. You can do what you can do in ROH in those smaller lots in R1 with that bylaw that we passed. That basically just banned, whatever size pool can fit, depending upon the architectural design. You
Yes,
got
you
the
can still,
setback thing, but I'm talking strictly about what's still allowed in R1 and R5 under 7,500 square feet is the, spa 15 by 10 maximum.
yes, that's correct.
Okay, that's all I want to, I just want to make sure that that is understood, because we're adding new confusion to this now a little bit. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. So in other words, John, I know you know this already. I'm just saying it just to be clear on this.
Pam, I see your hands up.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, John. And I just wanted to say, yes, that was correct and has been the case that the other that continued to be allowed is what the sponsor of the downsizing or getting rid of spas in the ROH, SOH. So she's actually addressing what was and is currently allowed in that area and in lots in the under 7,500 square feet. So this is not was not something that applied across the board to every property on the island. So I wanted to confirm Nat's thing on that. And the other thing I'd like to say, and this is only because it's come up at a couple of meetings that I've listened to where they say, well, there were only so many citizens voting. I'd like to reinforce the fact that all the people that do stay to vote, you can think of them as what is left in a representative town government. They're the people that have read the articles. They're the ones that are concerned about the island. They're the ones that are willing to take the time to stay and to vote. So to dismiss them as if they have no value because there weren't enough of them. If we waited to have a quorum for every question that came up at our annual town meeting, we would really have difficulty even pulling a town meeting off. So that's a little bugbear, obviously, this little thorn that gets under my skin, because I know I took hours out of my day and preparing, and I know hundreds of others that did that too. And I think they should be commended for staying and showing up. So sorry for my rant, but thank you for the time.
Thank you. Andrew, I don't see any other hands. You want to continue?
Yep, so the next article would basically allow storage containers by special permit in the commercial mid-island area. Right now, they're limited to the, I think, C-Tech and commercial industrial area. So this would expand that allowance. I'm sure we'll hear more.
Andrew, is there a quantity for that, or is that go to the other areas, the same quantity count and approval of colors and things like that?
Sorry, say that again, John.
Yeah, a quantity. Is there a certain number or limitation to what we're talking about for the Mid-Island? Is it one? Is it a residential use or commercial use? And or do we have the same privy to enforce colors that they're uniform with, et cetera?
So it's by special permit. So the board has, 4 of the 5 of you voting on it have control over numbers, appearance, colors, et cetera, et cetera.
Great.
I think that, John, through you, Andrew, I think that this idea makes sense, especially with what we did with the one down there in Coffin's Pit. Kind of fits this screened, it's got fencing. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that comes into these. paint in different color, whatever. So it makes sense, and I think that this is a good idea. I didn't realize this was, I didn't see this one, but I mean, how many areas are there for CMI? This is, around marine lumber and stuff like that. I mean, there's probably a few things that could come up over time for this to make sense.
And the last, Megan, so this next one, if we could pull that map up, so you all are looking at this. A particular article was put in by Williams, proposing to change an area from Lug 2 to R5 or CN. This is adjacent to the Richmond property. It's in an area that we've talked about before. So the outline in red outlines the actual parcel. And what is coming or would be a part of this is that the subject property, the only reason to really consider this is that the subject property would be limited to some sort of affordability. And the other main point is that the access to this property would extend via that roadway. This is where Clay Street and Harvey Road come together. And, there was a concern about that being opened up to vehicular traffic. And the point here is that, and I know that the Housing Trust has looked at this about, an actual design or whatever, but so whether that all comes together by the time we review this remains to be seen. But I want you to understand that it's related to affordable housing, and that the access point again is designed to go away from that neighborhood on Skyline Drive, not to connect to it, except by walking and pedestrian, which again is an ongoing goal that, and underground utilities for the water extension service that would come down there.
Now, if I can comment, Andrew, as a Community Preservation Committee member, as appointed by this group, that this applicant did put an application before us this past year, and the CPC found merit in it. However, we did not give them any financial consideration because it was in the preliminary stage, and there were so many things that needed to be addressed, and it's just it's in the infant stage where too many questions. So it definitely is, something to consider, and I hope that they can they can dot the i's and cross the t's, because it has some merit and just needs to be explored a lot.
Dave's hand is raised.
Yeah, I'm looking. Dave, go ahead.
Through you, John. Andrew,
Sure.
was there in the decisions surrounding Richmond, was the town supposed to take that street, or what was that all about?
So yes, the town, if the town requests that street, the owner has to deed it over to the town. So it has to deed over the fee interest of the road and an easement at the end for future, the agreement of the subdivision is that, the road is blocked by a fence, and the understanding has been that it will be open for pedestrian and bike use, in addition to the water line that would extend to the corner of Skyline. So.
Awesome, and thanks. And then just one more, and it's not just this article that I'm gonna make this statement about. It just always seems odd to me when we get these zoning change articles that this, not just this one, there was a few more previous, that not one person in the neighborhood ever signs these, which I find a little telling. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
So the last citizen article here is the zoning bylaw regarding short-term rentals, and we are going to discuss our own short-term rental with you all. And if you've read this particular bylaw, it's talks about principal and accessory uses, which are important to understand with this article. We certainly have some concern, and as you know, and you've heard me say before, that just putting all kinds of uses to special permit, you better think long and hard about that as a board and for your staff, which we already are having some issues in keeping up with the level of support needed for special permits. So again, we'll I'm sure have more discussion on that. And then if there's any other thing on this particular citizen article, I do want to sort of talk to you all about some of the working concepts we have with short-term rentals for a planning board and select board sponsored article. Anything else here?
I don't see any.
When are we going to talk about it?
Hang on, Fritz. We're going to move into that right now.
Oh, okay. I thought you were stopping.
No, we have another couple hours to go
Okay.
here. So.
Okay.
Put the microwave on.
That's
Right,
it.
so anyway, what we have been doing is doing, I would say, quite a lot of research, gathering some information about short-term rentals and what the actual data shows us right now about them and where they're located. The first slide, if you would, outlines, and Megan, I don't know if can you blow this map up a little bit?
Not on the PowerPoint, but I can unshare this and try and blow up the actual PDF. So hold on.
Okay. Okay, great. So anyway, what you see here is a point wherever there is a short-term rental, and that list has been provided to us by the state. This took a lot of work, I can tell you, by our GIS coordinator, but I think it shows at a glance, that these particular properties are located. I mean, there's a huge concentration in the downtown area, as you can see right there. In Nantucket, and the concentration that you see sort of along Old South Road is the R5 Noshup subdivision. Again, they're located really throughout the island at this point. So if you go to the next slide, we've broken it down by zoning districts. And the first slide is a number. Oh, sorry, Megan.
Are you seeing the PowerPoint presentation again?
No, just the point map is still up right now.
Okay, hold on. Let's see what's going on here. I think I might need to reshare. Hold on.
Okay, great. So this first graphic shows the number of units by zoning district. And again, you can see this reflects the large number that exists now in ROH and R1. by, the other districts as they're laid out. And then in some of the districts now, this shows the percentage of all dwelling units. So in SR1, for example, it's over 25% of the dwelling units are actually used now for short-term rental. Between 20 and 25% in the old historic districts, commercial downtown, R1 and VR. And so again, that reflects those concentrations you saw in Nantucket, in downtown, and in to a certain extent in Sconset. So if you go to the next slide, please. We've been looking at, again, what are the problems, what are the, that we need to look at when it comes to short-term rental. We did do an extensive analysis of the noise complaints of these 2,241 registered short-term rentals. Leslie, can you just summarize this for everybody?
Sure. So based on the information that we received from the state, there's 2,241 registered short-term rentals on Nantucket. We received some confidential data from the police department about noise complaints from May 1st, 2020 to October 1st, 2020. We thought those dates were important because that was the summer leading up to the proposed short-term rental bylaw. We went through the complaints. Out of all the 557 calls that came in, only 11.8% were related to short-term rentals. So we cross-checked the addresses from the police call log with the database that we received from the state. So that's how we were able to verify, whether or not they were related to a short-term rental or not. I mean, what we don't know is who was residing at the home at the time, but is it on the short-term list or not? Out of all of the 66 addresses that were registered as short-term rentals, there were only 10 that had more than one complaint. And again, out of the 2,241 registered short-term rentals, slightly over 97% of those were not the subject of a noise complaint. And most of the complaints were, there's a party, or some were just, there are people talking in the backyard. That was sort of generally what we found with the ones that were related to short-term rentals.
Next slide. So looking at some different concepts on how might introduce some zoning changes to address this issue. And one thing, there are 6 identified areas that the legislation, and that legislation is relatively new, as you all, I think, know, which is Section 14 of the Act. They talk about 6 specific regulations municipalities can put in place. So the first one is the existence of or location of operators. That has 2 subsections: regulating the class of operators and also the number of days a person may operate in a calendar year. The other items, and that is the section that we think is best related to zoning. The other sections talk about licensing or registration. That is different from the state process. Number 3 of that list of 6 is no outstanding enforcement actions. Number 4 is inspections. Number 5 is penalties for violation. And number 6 is reasonable fees. So items number 2 through 6 are going to have to be part of a general bylaw, if that would be something that to be pursued. It's something that is one of our concepts that I think is something that should be pursued. It's something that town council thinks that both a zoning and some sort of licensing / registration process that's different need to be developed. So in terms of, I'm going to focus on zoning right now. So the first working concept that we have is, again, what we're doing is entering a definition of short-term rental, which is consistent with the state. And basically to allow a maximum of one rental lease per lot used as short-term rental. And so what this is trying to do is to get at what we don't, or I guess what we want, the idea behind this is to discourage the separate rental of a primary and a secondary dwelling. So where you have basically no owner's presence, or you have sort of split control of the dwelling units on the lot. So, and that could go for, an accessory dwelling or some other dwelling that basically there'd be just one contract or one rental lease. What I've heard is that, in some cases, an entire property, so it would include a second dwelling, would be subject to a short-term rental, and that's going again to one party. Other cases, and including the recent case that was heard on Dover Street, you have, family members switching from the main house to the small house in the summer season, and then this allows, so there would allow the flexibility between the dwelling units, but it just would mean that you're not renting both out at the same time. So again, that's a concept that we've been thinking about and talking about at the staff level. Number two is to, again, define the short-term rental and prohibit in certain types of housing that we have created to encourage year-round and seasonal or employee housing. So that would include the apartments, the apartment buildings, and the workforce rental housing. We've already, at least in properties that we issue special permits for, which is the workforce rental housing, we've already incorporated this as part of the special permit process. So what we would be doing here is just extending that further and not allowing them in these types of developments. So that's again, looking at the specific type of housing. So working concept 3 is to allow a maximum number throughout the island common ownership. So what this means is to, this deals with the definition of hotel, and I'm sorry, no, this is to set, Leslie, which one is this? No, you were taking notes.
Yep, this is the one to limit the maximum amount so that you at some point switch to basically hotel status.
So this deals with this would basically say that operation of more than a certain number of dwelling units would switch you into hotel status. So what we would be doing is changing the definition of hotel. So if you are operating 5, 6, some number, and the number we looked at is, 10 is a number that we use in the bylaw under formula business. 10 is the limit when you start introducing a major commercial development, or it could be something lower than that, maybe above 4, which, a standard residential property can have up to 3 dwellings. So again, a number somewhere maybe between 4 and 10 is sort of the idea behind this. Next concept, number 4. And this is something that the housing production plan and other bylaws is that borders at least in owner occupied dwelling units, there probably should be something in our bylaw that confirms that that's allowed. It's being again permitted as a broad accessory use interpretation right now. Again, this is sort of that original short-term rental where someone made rooms available in their existing house, and I think it's a practice that we want to include in the bylaw and make sure that that's not impacted in what we do in the other sections. And then 5 is what is able to be done is to limit the maximum numbers of days available in a short-term rental use. And this goes to the intensity argument, where a short-term rental that is rented for, I guess, on a constant basis would create problems and issues for abutters. I know that there was a pretty strong reaction to the limit of 45 days. Is that not covering, properly covering a season? So again, there might be some number that's either above 90 or 120 and not more than 180, which would cover the time frame of short-term rentals, and would leave, I guess it would help to alleviate the intensity use of these particular properties, because half the time it would either be under either long-term rental or actual ownership.
Andrew, if I could interrupt, David, you had your hand up. Is there something?
Johnny, can I just finish through and then we could
Sure.
take
Okay.
questions at the end? I would appreciate that. 6 is the registration or licensing process in the general bylaw. This does require a department to manage this process. And one of the concepts that we've talked about here is that enforcement has to be more than what the zoning allows. Zoning allows basically a $300 a day maximum per day per infraction, and that is not likely to be, a deterrent enough in the situations where you may have, a minority problem renter, or where you do have issues that, and were kind of existent in the Styler case. So the process that we think is more, I guess, appropriate here would be similar to the liquor violations, where there may be warnings, but eventually there would be prohibitions or removals of certain of rental or whatever, if there's ongoing violations that are not addressed. Again, what we're seeing now, at least the data that Leslie talked about, is that even though it doesn't cover all potential noises, but at least noise that generates a noise complaint, it is not a big issue at this point. But for those where there may be continuing problems at one specific address or another, there needs to be a way of maybe addressing, how those properties are managed, so they don't become problematic. So again, that's where we are right now at this point. There's some additional information that I want to share with you before we get to, I think, a final article, including some of the history of, where hotel development was actively discouraged here in the 1980s. I think it's important to understand that the residential commercial 2 district was created in 1980 to basically discourage hotels and transient residential facilities from moving outside of the downtown area. It's worthwhile noting that during that time, throughout the 80s, there was an average of over 500 lots created per year during that time. In many of the areas that were ironically being discussed for resort type developments, including Noshup and Appleton Road and some of the areas that we are talking about today. So anyway, we want to get the board's thoughts on any of the concepts that we're thinking about. If there's any support for them at all, and if you as board members have your own ideas about what we should or shouldn't be looking at, we're certainly open for suggestions.
David, I know you had your hand up. Are you still, has it been?
Yeah, no, I've got a list of questions on different concept articles. So I just put it up on the first one.
Sure.
So, but I think Andrew, through John, if I may,
Go ahead.
some of these are very close to Act Now articles to me, which was soundly defeated last year, 2-1. And just as a general thing, is it because of the rulings in the courts or the one court case that you're looking to do this?
Well, yeah, David, I think what we're seeing is the Styler case, while it is very unrelated to Nantucket and to the Cape, it's a discussion that my fellow planning directors across the Cape are discussing right now. And one of the reasons for it is that our definition of uses and that same definition of uses in the Linfield zoning bylaw talks about uses that aren't specifically sort of addressed are not allowed, right? And we've had 2 cases now that have advanced to the Zoning Board of Appeal. So we've had, the first case was New Mill Street. And so the building commissioner in that case made a determination that the use was not commercial, made a determination that the subject property was being used as a single family home. That case or that appeal went to the Zoning Board of Appeal. The Zoning Board of Appeal upheld the building commissioner. And that case proceeded to, I believe it was land court. And that case was never settled because the property was sold. And so the issue became moot. So most recently, an abutter on Silver Street made a complaint about a property on
Silver Street.
what's the name of the street? I can't remember.
Westover.
Westover, thank you.
Eastover. Sorry.
Eastover.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that.
Oh, Westover. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
9
okay.
Westover.
That case was just heard. Again, it followed the same appeal. You know, the zoning enforcement officer denied it, and it went to the zoning board. The zoning board upheld the building inspector. And now whether or not that advances or not, we're not sure. But without anything specific in the bylaw, it sort of leaves the door open for these continuous, claims and process here, where the issue is not specifically addressed in the bylaw, and the building commissioner, the building commissioner is the final word on the interpretation. But like anything, that's subject to, further appeals and determinations. So we're not sure how that will come out. But I think that's the reason for considering the changes to the bylaw. But they're not, I wouldn't characterize them as being, I guess, to the level that have been submitted prior.
All right, fine. I did have a couple of questions. So in concept 1, if you had a tertiary dwelling that has to be rented year round, which is what we're proposing, you wouldn't be able to rent the other houses.
There could be, if the tertiary dwelling is rented year round, one of the other houses could be rented as a short-term rental.
Okay, I didn't see that in that concept, so that's what brought the question.
No problem.
So in the common ownership thing in concept 3, if I own 11 houses in different LLCs, is that common ownership?
Guess that would depend on how the bylaw is written to define them, but I guess the intent would be that common ownership and management of like multiple houses above a certain scale is different. So that's the principle there.
What does that do to somebody like Zillow or Airbnb that has 1,000 houses?
But they don't necessarily own them, right? I mean, they're just a platform.
They're different LLCs too. You said management.
Yeah, it wouldn't. The management is a decision by the owner. It's not in that context. I'm sorry. That's what I mean by management, not by a platform.
Okay. So you could own 11 LLC houses and manage it on the same website platform.
Correct.
Okay. Good with 4. Number of days in use is, I think it's got to be very general because it's going to hurt, not just, I think it hurts the real estate business less than it does the commercial industry downtown. So I think you need to keep those days. Great. 180 is fine.
And I just, I want to be clear that, these concepts are, if the board supports some and not others, that's fine. I mean, we're trying to get some policy level direction here. And if the answer is we don't want to do any of them, I mean, that's fine too, with the understanding of where we are in terms of, what I just described is the process that we're sort of navigating through right now.
Okay, and my last one.
Sure, go ahead, Dave.
The concept on 6, I take it that department will be paid for by the registration process if that were to go through. And I think Leslie's slide of having no real complaints, being such a small amount of this, is that really necessary?
I'm sorry, the registration, is that what you mean?
Well, the department to control some.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think that the department is an existing department, not necessarily a new one. It may be a department that needs additional resources. I'm not sure about that. Different communities do it differently. So some do it through a licensing provision.
Well, somebody's got to do the license. Somebody's got to patrol the license, so to speak, or enforce.
That's right.
So there's going to be hires. And is that worth it if we have, so few complaints? That was in Leslie's first slide.
That's true. And the licensing, there's got to be some sort of local licensing. And again, it doesn't have to be necessarily separate. It could be something through Plus. Other Cape towns, have a licensing with certain self-reported. We're not a fan of or supporter of doing, 2,000 new inspections of all these, but what many towns do is, basically where they do a self-reporting type arrangement about smoke detectors and other things. And there's a fee that ranges, Provincetown has like a fee of $100 for 3 years. Other communities have around $100 fee. So again, the licensing and the registration portion is going to be another department if it's required at all.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it.
I see your hand up, Cam. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'd really like to thank Andrew and his team for following up on these. I think it would be better if it were sponsored from the town and through a subordinate group. But what I was wondering when I first raised my hand is whether we could, or I could, or something, get that slideshow. I don't know if you email it or make it accessible, because I'd really like to think about some of the concepts. I thought Andrew did a really nice job, but I'd like to be able to contemplate some of, the ramifications as David was talking about, without having to review the entire YouTube of this. So I'm just sort of wondering if that's available. And again, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. I do think that, yes, it's across the Cape, but I do believe it's, it's across the country and the world, really, that people are trying to or towns are trying to figure out how to have some kind of governance around short-term rentals that takes it out of the court system and makes it more defined within the bylaws. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Campbell. We definitely can get that to you. And, we will be having a discussion with the select board on this. I've had some input from different members, so.
And Andrew, I'm a numbers person, so I'm just reviewing some of the things on your slide. And with the 2,241 registered short-term rentals, 557 complaints for noise. 6 were registered to short-term, which represents 11.8%. Of those, 10 are multiple complaints. So we're really looking at, if you boil that all down to about 0.4% are addressed to the noise complaints. And I'm wondering, and I 100% appreciate that the town, yourself, are looking into the concerns and addressing future positions. And I know this has been a hot topic, especially at our annual town meeting. So there was considerable discussion about it, and a third voted for it. So that's a considerable number or that's a big number to consider and respect opinions about. But I just, when you look at that, on the flip side, you have different options. And when we're addressing, future, jobs, and I'm not talking just about realtors and rentals, cleaners, service people, caretakers, restaurants that feed off of this, all the different services, everything from a wedding to a beach, clam bake. I just hope that, we're looking at it from a position where we don't want to stagnate our economic development here, because when the rest of the world, including where I originally came from, New Jersey, Long Beach Island, coming back from the shore on any given weekend, you were expected to be in traffic for 6 hours. So when we talk about traffic here, of course it's an issue. When we have to hold up in traffic and it takes us 30 minutes to get from Surfside to downtown, that's an inconvenience that we're not used to. And I've said it before, but you know what? When you look at different parts, Long Island and different shore areas that have this short-term rental, there's so much more that we have to consider. So I don't want a few to drive the many. And as it becomes an issue, and now maybe at future meetings, annual town meetings and introducing articles and bills, the numbers move up to 50% or where you have a majority, that's going to be, I don't want to say that we're not putting the cart before the horse. We're exploring things now and talking about them. But when I'm looking at these numbers, I just find it very almost disturbing that the few are representing or trying to represent the many, and the numbers are not lying. These are coming from a legitimate source from the police station. So it's just, I don't know. I think I've said a lot. I'm just amazed at, how much effort and energy that we have to commit to this. And, I'd be curious to see what the future brings, but I do thank you for your work.
John?
Yes, Fritz.
I want to also thank Andrew and the staff for doing all the work. And I really do believe this is a good start. And I do also really believe that if we do nothing, we do it at our own peril, because eventually one of those cases is going to go through the court system. And then they're going to have the courts telling you what you can do or not do until you change it by a zoning bylaw. So I think we're much better off to take this in hand and talk through it, work through it, and try to come up with something that's palatable to the majority or 2/3, whatever's required. Just one, and the only question I have, because I think this will come up, I mean, a lot of it is the question of what's a short-term rental. So, because in the citizens articles, short-term rentals are defined one way. I think you said that for this purpose, you're defining it as per the state for what, for purposes of the registration and tax requirements? Is that where that comes from?
So it's really, the rental of under 30 days of a dwelling, an apartment, a condominium,
Okay, so it does go back to that saying the state definition is less than 30 days.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure we weren't talking apples and oranges if we were talking, some other definition. Okay, thank you.
So if there are any, I'd like to talk through a little bit of, if we could go over just a little bit further discussion into the various ones, if most board members have more comments.
Standing hands, Andrew, go ahead.
So and again, I understand this is a lot, and I'm not saying that, all of these have to be, I need some direction though from you on the board members where you're either positive or negative or neutral, or, so if you all don't want to deal with short-term rentals at all, I guess now would be the time to talk about that. Or we can dive in here a little bit, at least for discussion purposes. You still have a little bit of time before you make a final decision, but we want to be able to take these concepts and develop some actual drafts to put before you, in time, with time before the final warrant. So, and is that okay to walk through some of these concepts a little bit more?
Yes.
Yeah,
I
I think we
think
need
so.
to.
Okay.
You don't?
So
Okay. Oh, okay.
So the idea, and again, of the maximum of one rental lease per lot used as short-term rental. So again, the point on that was, and I appreciate David's question on that, is so other dwellings on the property can be leased for non-short-term rental purposes. They can be leased year-round, they can be leased for more than 30 days, or again, they can be occupied by the property owner. And that what this is designed to get to is, again, we have a purpose. We have some general purposes about why second dwellings are in our bylaw. Generally to generate, they're either for occupancy for year-round rentals. They're also there to generate income for year-round occupants of the property. So having both the primary dwelling and the secondary dwelling leased out or being operated as a short-term rental separately is what this is getting at, is that would discourage that unless the entire property is rented out, to under one particular lease. So that's the idea behind this one. And I'm happy, people think that's important or not important, or a good policy or bad policy. I'd like to get some feedback from you on that.
Fritz, I view as positive. I mean, I don't know how many cases today we have where there are multiple units on a lot, but in concept, it seems to be something that, to me, isn't gonna be detrimental to your average resident who rents his or her home out for short-term rentals. So
I agree with Fritz.
Okay, anybody else? So the concept number 2 is about defining, or again, where short-term rentals might be discouraged, and that's, in general, the types of housing units that we have created or we allow in certain commercial districts where we're trying to create employee type housing situations. So it's apartments in mixed use, so where you have apartments above stores or on the same lot as commercial development. Certainly in the industrial area, and there's not any short-term rentals in there right now, but it might be an area to continue to discourage them from going into for a number of reasons. The 2 areas where we have short-term rentals now in apartments, mixed in with commercial, is the downtown area and somewhat in the Mid-Island area. So the idea might be to, allow short-term rentals in those types of units, provided there's some sort of year-round unit, as well. The mixed-use apartments are up to 4, and again, there's some density standards about that. But again, this concept is to look at those types of units and maybe to discourage or not allow short-term rentals in them.
Let's see. Cam, your hands up.
Yes, thank you, John. I was sort of looking for a thumbs up kind of an icon, so he could just get an idea of how many people supported it. But we don't have that option. But I did want to support this as well as the first article. I think when housing is being supported by the broad base of taxpayers, I think it's important that those same taxpayers feel like it has value and is worth doing. So I think that this sort of gets to an underlying thing that I hear complaints of, where people in affordable housing units are renting out their apartments or their house or whatever, and people seem to have a bit of a negative edge about that. So I'd like to support number 2. And if there is a thumbs up, I would.
Andrew, just a question. I mean, this sounds like it's very similar to the old RC2 multi-overlay district where it limited you to year-round affordable housing and not short-term weekly turnovers or rentals. Very similar, but I think the biggest question that we had in the past with those issues were, how do we enforce those? It's nice to put it in writing, but how do we enforce, and how do we find, and how do we maintain that it's being?
Yeah.
One thing that I've been looking at is, and because I'm concerned about that too, John, that, with our current resources, I don't really see that there's a lot of, I guess, slack to, be doing that. I have been in touch with a company that has done some work in other Massachusetts towns and has at least doing some data work on the vineyard, where sometimes you can enter into a contract with these private entities and they do actually do enforcement basically for you. They do a lot of review of the various, online platforms. It's a cost that's probably in the, I'm going to say $20,000 to $50,000 a range. So I think, that is something that when we talk about, potentially a licensing fee or other things, the methodology or the method of enforcement needs to be considered. But it's clearly, in anticipation of this discussion, we didn't know, again, where this discussion or other concerns would go. And we did put in at least a placeholder for an additional staff person if something like this were, voted upon. So.
It's Fritz, just to address that question a little bit. I think that some of the enforcement would come through the registration and licensing. I mean, yes, you can always have the situation where somebody's not going to register and somebody's not going to get themselves licensed, but that would be a very flagrant violation. And I think if you have significant enough penalties, I think the registration and the licensing would probably allow you to identify the places and deal with most of the enforcement issue.
Yep. And to that point too, that's why we think that is probably necessary, because a penalty structure, would need to be part of that registration bylaw, and it needs to be more, I guess, more than our $300 per day maximum under zoning. Any comments, plus or minus,
Yeah,
negative,
Just-
neutral on any of on this particular one?
let me just. Never mind.
John, through you, I'm a plus. I mean, I think we're gonna have to expand the places that you're not allowed to have them. I mean, I think workforce housing is probably just the tip of the iceberg, to be honest.
Andrew, can I just real quick on this one thing, when you talking about the workforce, you're talking about downtown, commercial, above buildings, things like that, right?
Yes.
So when we, back in the, here I go again, back in the day, wasn't that long ago, we were requiring downtown to have housing. Then we kind of got away from it. It's sort of like the bus pass thing. We kind of phased that out because it was punitive in some cases for the applicant. It didn't always apply, right? So if a restaurant, or not, it doesn't have to be a restaurant, but a business downtown, like a shop that has something high end above it, now all of a sudden we're saying you can't do that. It's got to be for an employee. Is that kind of where this is going, or no?
Could be for a long-term rental. It's just, it could be for.
Still can be rented. It still can be rented, like for the summer.
Rented for more than 30 days. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
So it could be a year-round rental. It could be a long-term rental. It could be an owner occupant lives there. It's just that this would remove that from the short-term rental.
Right. And I feel uncomfortable a little bit, and I'm not speaking to one of the items, Andrew, and I know you've worked really hard at this, that you're trying to thread a needle, Andrew, and it's pretty obvious. We're trying to find something to say yes to. And I think the most important thing we found out is that the complaints are coming from houses with people making noise that aren't short-term rentals. Most of the noise. And to bend over backwards to find something, I think we need to first get this a legalized use so that we don't have any more 14 New Mill Street and 9 West Dover Street embarrassing situations that are really just going to go around and around and around. Because those two properties don't even have pools. They're the most simple houses I've, around as far as in that use. And, it's just going to go on forever until we figure out how to get this use legal in zoning officially to get so that we can find a way to regulate certain areas and certain, like what you're trying to do now. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, what you're trying to do now is sort of what we might do in a year or something like that. That's how I'm sort of seeing it. I'm not saying I'm not in favor of some of the concepts, but I'm thinking that we're sort of skipping over the bigger issue of sort of like weed,
Yep.
Everybody's smoking weed, but we never had it legal,
So this one you think is not maybe a priority or?
No, I'm not saying, I'm not even gonna say that. I'm just a general statement that, I think that the process that you're going through now is like the fine tuning pieces of the whole issue. When we still have the, we don't have the codifying part.
But I think Fritz said it well also. You know what? It's good that we're addressing it now. Better to be proactive than reactive. And we want to talk about this, discuss it, and see what we might be able to address looking into the future instead of having the state mandate what we have to do. So we might not get it right, but at least we can talk about it and see what direction we're going into. So I think even this particular one is very important for the, very similar to that one, like I said, over RC2 multi-overlay. The intent for the zoning was there and a lot of people didn't adhere to it. And that's doesn't help with the original intent to get affordable workforce housing. So this is, I think, kind of important to throw in there. We might not, again, we might amend it in the future, but it's something I think we should discuss now.
And can I just clarify too, that my approach to this is that the codification is part of this, subject to what I'm looking at as some reasonable guardrails around it. I mean, that's, and if you disagree with that, that's fine.
No, if as long as it can happen at the same, as long as it can happen together, that's fine. That's my basic concern. Can we do both in 1 year?
I think that I don't think that there will be support for just simple codification without a little bit further examination of the impacts of these units. I don't think so. But if you all disagree with me, I'm fine to hear that. I think 2/3 is a high majority to reach, and while I think there clearly wasn't 2/3 majority to adopt what was presented before town meeting, I think that there's a middle area here of reasonable limitations that could all be part of the same approach. But if you all think differently, I'm happy to hear it.
Let me re-say what I was thinking. I just, this isn't easy to do, so I have to come up with a way to explain it better. So you're talking, see, now you've flip the switch back to the town meeting guessing game, which I play all the time, and I agree with you, Andrew, on that. Here's what I'm saying. We confuse town meeting too much. That could be a problem, okay? So, but the general public, you know, what happened last year, nobody was ever really talking about it being not defined in the, you know, home occupancy use, okay, like other things that we've fixed over the years. It was an assumed allowed use, and it kind of still is. So that's, I think that's the biggest, you know, I don't want to say the biggest issue, but like that's the part that's sort of floating over the whole thing. It's sort of like an overlay of the whole issue. If there's a continued ability to, you know, cite a violation for anyone, by any neighbor, for what they think is an annoying use for their property, then that's going to continue to happen. So I don't know. I mean, I'm in agreement if we can do all of it at once. If there's a way to get some regulation in and the use itself to be codified, I'm fine with that. So I'm just not sure how that would happen in one article. I don't think, you know what I mean?
David Iverson, your hands up. You want to comment?
Yeah, listen, I think Andrew is going about this the right way. I think that there's two sides here that there's such a gap between them. We need to protect ourselves from this ongoing issue as far as legally in the town. So the use needs to be codified, but we're not going to get the other side to agree to a codification unless we meet them halfway with some guardrails. So I think we're going about this the right way. I think Andrew's touching on the important issues. And I think that when we get to public or to public comment here, I think it'll become more apparent on what directions we need to go to bring everyone together on this, because it's not an issue that's going to go away. It's not going to disappear. And the town needs to codify it in zoning somehow. So I think that we're on the right track. I think it's the details that are going to be the tough things to work out.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Continue.
So now, you know, the only thing I can say is, you know, and I understand this is a little bit hard discussing this, but this is needed, and we haven't had the chance to do this with the Zoom format and, you know, with people who are absent and everything else. And I really wanted to have a discussion before, you know, we start creating draft articles only to hear, oh, that's not what we said, or, you know, we're totally opposed to that. It's just not productive use of our time. Okay. So again, I'm hearing some support, but maybe that, you know, that might not be the most important thing to work on if there might be other things. So the working concept 3.
Andrew, what do you mean as to apartment buildings?
Yeah.
Oh, I guess I was thinking, I was hearing it, the people were generally in favor of it, but whatever.
Okay. I mean, we're going to work on a draft that deals with it, and you all can make a final decision on what you want to bring forward. But
yep. Okay.
Right. So the next one, the working concept 3 is about redefining what a hotel is and coming up with this idea that there's a maximum number of dwelling units that would be management by an owner, but not through a platform. So it does not include, again, I appreciate that clarification from David that it's not about a platform, but it would be, again, 4 or 5 units, and now they're all being managed under one. Does that matter? Does that not matter? I mean, it mattered with the development of the formula business article. And I mean, that applies to just a certain area of town, which is the overlay district, the formula business exclusion district. That, you know, is 10 properties worldwide under the same, you know, the same pins and uniforms and setup and whatever. So again, this is sort of applying that general concept. And what we've heard is that if all the units are owned by one company, is that against the smaller scale, you know, an investor that might own one or two? Is this a concept that anybody thinks we should think about or not?
Personally, Fritz, I think so. I mean, I think this gets at to some extent, addresses the issue of the absentee owner corporate business investing in short-term rentals, I think, at least to the extent you, because I presume those are through common ownership directly or indirectly. And I think we'd have to be careful about making sure that common ownership is fairly broadly defined. And I think there are examples of that in the zoning bylaw already. But I think that would go toward that. And I'm not sure how many local people it would affect. I just don't know. I don't know how many local people there are in the short-term rental business as opposed to absentee people in the short-term rental business. But I think it's a good, I think it's positive because I think it's certainly one of the big issues that the proponents of the short-term rental bylaw to date have been looking for or objected to.
Anybody else? David Callahan.
Yeah, I'm not sure what this solves. Yeah, I agree with Fritz that is what the people that brought the last article, that was one of their main points. However, the ones I know of in this category are well-managed, well-run, they're great, they have good houses, and they take good care of them. And I don't think the noise complaints come from those things. So outside of trying to get a few more votes, I'm not sure what Article 3 does for the town.
Cam?
Thank you, John. I just wanted to, again, support this. I thought Fritz had some very good comments on it. And I fully understand where people that deal with real estate and rentals, et cetera, find these things to be an imposition. But I did take a business course once, and in it, it said if you receive one complaint, you should perceive that as 24 unstated complaints. So I think the emphasis on the lack of complaints, I think that maybe what you're asking is that more people complain because, you know, a lot of people try not to complain out here. I think that's one of our positive suits. And I'd hate to encourage more complaints, but I think that should be taken seriously, but I don't think it's the full defining measure of the situation. And so I just wanted to support Fritz and his comments.
So Andrew, I have a question for you. Going forward, I mean, all of these are well thought out and they're really good positions for discussion. And what would be the negative to be inclusive of not only 1, 2, 3, all the way to 6 in a potential presentation for an article, and then at town meeting, There might be issues. I'm sure this will be called. And then people in the general public will stand up and maybe we make an amendment and they remove number 2 or remove number 3. But I think by presenting it all and leaving it open for discussion to fine tune, it's not a bad thing, because this definitely has some merit that would address some people's concerns, and maybe with this they'd be satisfied. Maybe they're not so much worried about number 1 or 2, but they are worried about this and becoming something similar to what Wendy Hudson had presented many years ago with franchises in the downtown historical district. It has a little bit of a similarity with that article that was passed. So I'm not opposed to have you keep going and see what we can do to add them in, and then maybe have them pulled at town meeting. Dave.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's an important part of the puzzle. I'm not sure it's the most important, but it did seem to be, Act Now did seem to think it was an important part of the puzzle. So I think we should look at it. To me, I just don't, I'm not sure that what the gain is, but I think that it's not the most important part of it, but I think we should definitely look at it.
Nat, was your hand up? Or you're just scratching?
John?
No,
Yes,
I'm good.
Fritz.
John, I would support you, and I think we should start out with coming up with something that includes all 6, and then look at it from there and see what it is. Because certainly limiting the number of days, I think, is important. Allowing boarders and owner-occupied dwellings, I presume that that's intended to protect the, let's call it the VRBO, by the person who lives in a house and rents out a bedroom. And I don't think I've heard anybody, including Act Now, to really be opposed to that. And the last one's the registration. So I think we should move forward and as a starting point to just say, let's include them all and see where we go. Did you, as to the number of days, I know this concept's been presented before, but did you give any thought to resident versus non-resident, or what's your thinking there in terms of what would be permitted?
So, problems is, I think the use by a resident versus use by a non-resident. That's one of the things that town council had received some sort of warnings about, like, how do you actually defend an ordinance like that when it's not sort of applied in a general way to the use? And I mean, this is part of the problem with zoning versus registration. So in this case, it's just trying to get at it was simply to get at the intensity, not necessarily a resident offering it or a private party. I mean, there are people that argue that the non-residents, have it, so maybe, it's better. So again, I couldn't justify, at least in my mind, a real reason to split that for resident and non-resident that I feel comfortable defending.
Okay.
But, possibly there's a way to do that in the registration that is, again, outside of the, the general direction of zoning itself.
Dave Callahan? David? Your hand's up. No? Okay. Maybe the hand's just stuck.
So, Mr. Chairman, I mean, are we basically fine with advancing the general concepts for now? We'll by your next meeting, we'll have some or draft type regulations that you can take a look at. And that everyone comfortable with us moving ahead with these general ideas, or are there any that people feel strongly should not move forward right now?
I'm going to try David one more time. His hand was raised. Let's see if that's legitimate. Yes.
Oh, it was. I lost my internet again, but it wasn't. I'll agree with Andrew to go ahead with all of them. Let's take a look at them. I'm not in favor of all of them, but I think if we tweak them a little, they might become.
We're losing you, David. No volume. Nope.
Yeah,
And signal.
I think, I agree with what David just said. I just think that this whole resident thing, Andrew, is definitely gonna be something. And we have that with steamship, with the excursion, street list. What's a voter? You know, how do you get your residential exemption for your taxes? I mean, there's like 3 different ways to be a local. Or whatever we're gonna call it. And then this is coming up. So this is number 4. So we may need to make sure that we know what that even means. You know, it's not an easy thing to do. It might not be necessary at all. But I agree with bringing them.
Yeah.
As long as we're on the right track, I think we cleaned up my concern that I had a little bit, and I think we'll get there.
And I think, Andrew, you're hearing from the board that I think you should go forth with this. And obviously there's going to be future discussions at our meeting, especially in January, but you laid out some pretty good thoughts for, things for us to think about.
Great, and I really appreciate the discussion with the board. Thank you all for this. It's very helpful.
Thank you.
Mr.
Dave?
Chair?
Yes, or is that Fritz speaking?
Yeah,
Fritz.
I don't know where you're going next, but I know Megan had asked about January dates and so I just, can we get an idea of what we think the number of meetings might be in January and when they might come?
Meg, if I recall last year, didn't we have a lot scheduled towards the end of January, that last week in January going into February? Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought we were really concentrated on that last week.
If I can just add real quick, Megan and I were looking over the town meeting schedule today, and your motions are supposed to be submitted to the finance committee around the 1st of March. I mean, typically, or excuse me, not the finance committee, but to the select board, your final motions. And typically they try to get those wrapped up before everyone goes away for February vacation. So, we have your regular meetings in January and February, and we usually schedule, at least one special one in January and go from there to see how much progress that you're making on the articles. So we can schedule those for special meetings and for your regular meetings, but it's a little bit of a play by ear situation. But there are a lot of articles this year. And as Andrew has said, some of them are going to take a lot of time to discuss. They're not quick map changes. So
Let's just go across. Is there anyone in particular from the board that has a schedule that knows of any conflict already?
No.
Nat, Dave,
I'm just, what were the dates again on that?
the whole month of January?
Oh, I'm all set. Well,
Just let us
I'm
know
okay
if you know of
until
any
we-
conflicts.
Yeah,
I'll get back to you on that, Megan. I forgot what the dates are. That I have one thing in January, but I forgot what it is, the date. But it's probably gonna work out.
I'm okay for January. I don't have any conflicts till the very end of February, beginning of March.
I'm fine for now, Meg.
I'm fine as well.
Great.
We do have a planning board meeting for the 10th though, right? Regular schedule? Yeah, okay.
And then NPDP is the 24th.
Isn't it the
Yeah, okay.
13th? I thought the planning board meeting was the 13th.
Oh, December 13th.
I mean, okay, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Yep.
That's okay. December 13th is the regular
Yeah.
planning board meeting. January 10th is a regular.
Okay,
when
sorry.
it's okay. There's a holiday on, I believe it's Monday, the 17th, and then Monday, the 24th is the NPNEDC meeting.
Okay,
I'll
is there
get back
anything
to you in
else?
January.
I think we're getting close to the end of the agenda. Anyone have anything else to add? Well, I'd just like to say thank you all for putting up with me and the few hours that we've had. Again, I wish Judith the best and speedy recovery. We miss her. I miss her immensely. And, thank you all the staff. You're always well prepared and make my job really easy up here. So, thank you all. And unless anyone has anything, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Thank you for all the hard work, staff.
Yep.
Yeah,
I know
thank
that
you.
was a ton of
Great
work.
job.
Yep.
So
Anyone?
moved. Second,
I'm sorry, motion's been made
second.
by, I missed who made the motion. Fritz?
I'll make the motion.
I'll
Sorry.
second it.
There's a motion by Fritz, a second
Second.
by Dave, and in roll call, please. Fritz,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Nat,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Thank you very much. Everyone enjoy a good night.
Thank you very
Take care.
much. Good
Thank you.
job,
Good
John.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you, guys.